Chapter 279. Accompanied by a burst of laughter, a few figures filed in from outside the door. The leader was a large man with a knife scar on his face. He wore a thin shirt in the middle of winter, exposing a large portion of his chest. The black hair, covering his heart, was almost growing to his neck. The other people also looked quite fierce. They were all ruffians and bullies on the street. There weren't many people who didn't know them. Although they had quieted down a bit because of the government, the fear that had accumulated in their hearts for a long time could not be dispelled in a short period of time. Because they had been disturbed from watching the play, a few spectators wanted to stand up and throw out the people who didn't open their eyes. But when they saw the situation at the door, they immediately sat back down and focused on watching the play, no longer daring to care about what was happening over there. If they provoked those ruffians, they wouldn't be able to live in peace in the future. This is Qing, in Prefectural City. We have to abide by the law. We don't have 10 strings of coins. If you continue to be so aggressive, don't blame us for reporting it to the government. Old Sun looked at the two men walking over from the corner and felt a bit more at ease. He looked directly at the knife-scarred man and said this. "Io, brothers, did I hear wrong?" The knife-scarred man heard this and was stunned for a moment. Then he laughed loudly and said, "Old man, you dare to talk about the law with us? On this street, I am the law." The ruffians behind him roared with laughter. The nobleman who gave them this task originally had connections with the government. Why would he be afraid of things like the law? They had already arranged everything. Even if they were arrested and sent to the county government, they would have a way to get out. The knife-scarred man pulled out a stool and blocked the door. He crossed his legs and looked at old Sunday. He said, "It seems that you don't care about what I said. I will say it here today. 10 strings of coins, not a copper coin less. Otherwise, I will smash your broken theater." Smash the theater? Is this how you smash it? A voice suddenly came from the side. Before the knife-scarred man could react, a long stool flew from the side and hit him squarely in the face. A few bloody teeth flew out of his mouth. The knife-scarred man was sent flying. His face was covered in blood, and he lay on the ground motionless. "Oh, it's an acquaintance." Fong clapped his hands and walked over. When he saw the knife-scarred man lying on the ground, he was also stunned. Although his face was covered in blood, that iconic scar indicated his identity. A few months ago, wasn't this the guy who wanted to have the son-in-law's money and was caught and beaten up by them? Kill of kill. Seeing their boss fall to the ground after the stool, of blood was seen. Every year, during the Qingming festival, they would clear the weeds on his grave. They were hoodlums, not fugitives. They could extort a few copper coins in exchange for wine money, tease innocent women on the streets, and take advantage of them. But when it came to murder and arson, they would never do it even if they were beaten to death. This was a matter of principle. He once had a few hoodlum brothers who had no principles. They did not behave like hoodlums and accidentally killed someone. Now, the grass on his grave was 3 feet high. Every year during the Qingming festival, they would loosen the soil and weed out the grass on his grave. This. Old man Sun's face turned green, and his lips were trembling. Teaching these thugs a lesson was not a big deal. How did it lead to the death of a person? This. Old man Sun's face turned green, and his lips were trembling. Teaching these thugs a lesson was nothing. How did it lead to the death of a person? The death of a person was a big matter, and the audience in the theater were also in a panic. One after another, they stood up from their seats. "Don't worry, he won't die." Fong patted old man Sun's shoulder and said indifferently. He knew very well what he did. At most, this guy's nose bridge was broken, and a few teeth were lost. It was not that serious. "Big brother, you died so miserably." A young man knelt on the ground with a plop, and before his tears could fall, he received a heavy kick in the chest. "This daddy is not dead yet." The knife-scarred man crawled up from the ground. In this life, he may not have experienced big wind and waves, but small wind and waves had never stopped. The scar on his face was left from when he fought with others. A mere stool was not enough to take his life. "What are you still doing? Beat him up, beat him hard. Today this daddy will break his 2 legs. Blood flowed down from his forehead, and his eyes were blurred. He didn't recognize any acquaintances. He just wanted to break the legs of the guy who had just ambushed him, and the matter of the 10 coins was temporarily thrown to the back of his mind. Seeing that his big brother was not dead, the young man who was kicked immediately got up from the ground, rubbed his chest, and said loudly, "Didn't you hear what Big Brother said? Break their dog legs." As soon as the word dog legs came out, half of his teeth were gone. Fawn slapped the young man's mouth, and he flew out with his teeth. Just like the knife-scarred man just now, he lay on the ground without moving. The knife-scarred man wiped the blood from his eyes and finally saw the man standing in front of him. The fierce expression on his face disappeared, and his whole body could not help but tremble. He would never forget that vicious beating for the rest of his life. Every night, he would dream about that face and still have some lingering fear. Those people were all monsters, even more barbaric than wild beasts. If it was possible, he would never want to meet them in his life. Unfortunately, the heavens did not give them good luck. In a moment he was stunned. The brothers he brought all fell to the ground and could not get up. This was such a familiar scene. The brothers with the best skills did not have the strength to fight back against these two monsters. They blocked a punch, and the next moment, they were kicked to the ground. If there were constables coming at this time, this nightmare would be as complete as the last time. As if they heard the call in his heart, a few figures wearing black clothes quickly appeared in front of him. Just as he was about to cry and complain, he saw the leader of the constables walk over and greet the man with a smile. He didn't hear what they said, but soon his brothers were chained up. After seeing the appearance of the leading constables, the knife-scarred man's 2 legs began to not listen to him. "It's better to offend the county magistrate than the king of hell." This was a sentence that everyone in the circle knew. The county magistrate naturally referred to County Magistrate Lou, and the king of hell they mentioned was also surnamed Lou. Although his name was Lou E., the chief constable of Anchi County government, he never showed mercy when dealing with criminals. It was said that during this period of time, the screams in the county government prison could be heard outside the county government. If they fell into his hands, it was really no different from going to hell. "You arrested the wrong person. You arrested the wrong person. You can't do this. It's him who beat people. It's him. You can't arrest me. I know Magistrate Wong. I know Magistrate Wong." When the knife-scarred man was dragged away by the constables, he cried with snot and tears. Seeing King of Hell, Lou turned around and smiled at him. He immediately rolled his eyes and fainted. The troublemakers were all taken away by the constables, and no one was killed, so the onlookers were relieved and went on with their business. The constables of the county government were obviously more dedicated than before, and they wouldn't help those ruffians to bully good people, which was a good thing. Those bastards who only knew how to bully people should be chained and locked up in the prison, never to be let out again. Seeing those ruffians being dragged away by the constables, Oldman's son was a little dumbfounded. Are they still the constables of the county government? They didn't ask the reason at all, but chained them and left. It seems that those ruffians will suffer a lot. When did the constables of the county government start to do good things? Oldman's son soon knew the reason. "Your Honor." Louis walked to Li Yi and saluted respectfully. Li Yi patted him on the shoulder and said approvingly, "Not bad. I heard that you've solved several major cases during this period of time, and the security of the prefecture city has been maintained very well. Everyone knows that there's a Hell King Lou in the county government." Liu Yi blushed and said, "It's all because of your good teaching." In front of Li Yi, he was even more humble than in front of County Magistrate Liu, and he admired Li Yi from the bottom of his heart. Liu Yi was very clear that he could have today's status because of the county magistrate's important position, which made him become the chief of constables in charge of all the bailiffs in a short period of time, from a constables who just ate and waited for death in the county government. Even when the county magistrate was not in the county government, what he did was what a county magistrate should do. Even the constables of the county government would sometimes ask him to go over when they encountered difficult cases. The county magistrate's kindness of enlightening him and the appreciation of him, there was nothing he could do except to earnestly perform the task assigned by the county magistrate. Listening to the conversation between the constables and Lee, Oldman's son found a stool and sat down, his legs and stomach trembling. County magistrate. It turned out that Lee was the county magistrate. No wonder Miss One didn't worry about those ruffians from the beginning. It turned out that she had known about it. Oldman's son didn't complain about Juan watching. The less they knew about the affairs of the big shots, the better. At this time, he didn't worry at all in his heart. From now on, they also had a backer behind them. Presumably, those guys who went to the brothels outside the city to look for trouble were all chained up with iron chains like dogs, right? Are your dog eyes blind to bully the county magistrate? If they don't lose a layer of skin this time, I will write the word son upside down, and those greedy guys who stretch their hands too far would be chopped off. No way. Did you really give them 10 strings of coins? When Oldman's son cursed in his heart, a surprised voice came from the door. He turned his head and saw a man in luxurious clothes coming in. The man looked around the theater a few times, clicked his tongue, and said, "I really didn't expect that such a shabby place could actually collect so much money. Leader Wu, this thing was done by you, right?" Oldman's son's anger was aroused again, and he looked at the man and said, "What thing?" The man in luxurious clothes sat opposite to Oldman's son and said with a smile, "I just heard that Old Son's theater earns a lot of money every day, and those ruffians deserve more protection and money. I just didn't expect that I still underestimated Old Son's ability." A straightforward person doesn't resort to insinuations. It's boring to be a coward. Oldman's son poured a cup of tea for himself, glanced at the man in luxurious clothes, and drank the tea in one gulp. He was no stranger to the man in luxurious clothes opposite him. The man was also an actor, but he was different from them. Wandering actors like them, in order to make a living, drifted around like duckweed without roots, and their lives were the most miserable. There were also actors in the palace, and there were also private actors in the homes of the high officials and nobles. Although these people didn't have much freedom, their lives were much better than theirs. As for those powerful troops, although most of them performed for the high officials and nobles, they never lacked freedom, and the money they earned was also incomparable to theirs. The man with the surname Wu was the leader of a famous troop in the prefectural city. Seeing that Oldman's son's face was indifferent and directly pointed out the topic, a trace of annoyance appeared on the man's face, but he quickly returned to normal and said, "Since that's the case, I won't beat around the bush. 10 strings of coins. How many books like Painted Skin and A Chinese Ghost Story do you have?" "We want all of them." Oldman's son's expression didn't change, but he was sneering in his heart. These books were all written by the county lieutenant, and he was sitting there now. If the man with the surname Wu had the ability, he could go and find him himself. Wanted to buy food for everyone with 10 strings of coins was simply a dream. Even if he agreed, the county lieutenant wouldn't agree. The man in luxurious clothes looked at the almost empty theater, and a trace of passion appeared in his eyes. Even such a rundown place had so many people. If it was his troupe, the scene would be even more lively. It was a waste to leave such excellent books here. He had already done his research. These new plays did not exist in the market at all. Although they would be able to imitate most of them in a few days, they would still lose the initiative. When the time comes, everyone would have seen the original play. Who would still watch them? Give up. Don't mention 10 strings of coins. Even if it's 100 strings of coins, we won't sell it. With the backing of a big shot, Oldman's son was full of confidence. The man in luxurious clothes narrowed his eyes and said, "So, you plan to take out 10 strings of coins every day. Maybe it will become 20 tomorrow." "So it was you who played tricks behind the scenes." Oldman's son sneered and said, "Don't worry, they won't come again." A few officials came and took them all away. "So what if I did it? Even if I didn't do it, someone else would. You don't think the government will really care about these things, do you?" The man in luxurious clothes looked at him mockingly and said, "You refuse a toast only to be forced to drink a forfeit. I hope you can still stand here when you see them tomorrow." After the man in luxurious clothes finished speaking, he suddenly felt a chill on his neck. An iron chain was hung on his neck. The constable locked the chain and said lightly, "Since it was done by you, it's easy. Come with me." Lu Yi's words were cold, without a trace of emotion. Chapter 280. There were only 3 days left until the end of the year. The closer it was to the new year, the easier it was for something to happen. The commoners in the prefectural city had already seen several groups of people with iron chains around their necks. They were all arrested and about to be dragged away. They were all familiar faces. Many people clapped their hands in glee when they saw hoodlums who did not do their jobs all day long being locked up in jail. This time, the other hoodlums in the city immediately calmed down. They obediently stayed at home and did not dare to wander around. Dao Ba and the others were all taken away. It was said that it was an order from King of Hell Lu. Dao Ba would be severely punished even if he did not die this time. It was better for them to behave themselves. Who knew if the iron chains would suddenly wrap around their necks? A theatrical troupe in the city suddenly closed its doors. The other troupes followed suit one after another. Only the theaters in the city and the brothels outside the city were still bustling with business. There was an endless stream of spectators. One group after another came and went. Everyone, including Old Sun, felt reassured when they saw the hoodlums who caused trouble being taken away by the officials. Now, even if they were to open brothels all over Anshi County, they would not encounter any obstacles. Who would have thought that the young man standing behind them was the county magistrate? Which hoodlum would dare to be reckless? He only asked the constables in charge of this street to pay more attention to this place. From today onwards, Old Sun and the others would most likely not encounter any obstacles. Perhaps it was because it was the new year they did not see the young girl who had become their disciple these few days. Recently, it was a busy time for the women and children. They cleaned up the dust, said goodbye to the old, and welcomed the new, and used flour to make all kinds of shapes. On the 30th day of the new year, the residence was already decorated with lanterns and colored banners. Regardless of ancient times or modern times, the new year was the most important festival of the year. On the night of the new year, the family could gather together for a reunion dinner. This meant that the family would still have a surplus at the end of the year. It was the happiest and most satisfying thing. Today, it was a special day. The streets in the city were not very lively. The shops were only open for half a day. When the sky turned dark, everyone returned home to prepare a sumptuous New Year's Eve dinner. After closing the door of the residence, the inside became a world of its own. For the naughty children, today was the happiest day of their lives. As long as they didn't cause too much trouble, their parents chose to turn a blind eye. After nightfall, a bonfire was lit in the outer residence. The naughty children kept throwing bamboo into the fire, listening to the crackling sounds of the bamboo. They competed to see who threw the bamboo into the fire with the loudest sound. This was the most traditional firecrackers. As for the nice-looking fireworks, they were too expensive. His parents could not bear to buy them. They could only watch as white light shot out from other courtyards explode in the sky. Every sound would cause the naughty children to scream. He didn't have time to watch the fireworks. He was tired of all kinds of large-scale fireworks displays in his previous life. The scene here was too small, and it didn't arouse his interest at all. In order to prepare a sumptuous New Year's Eve dinner, the whole family was busy in the kitchen. For the remaining dozen or so families in the mansion, this might be the most extravagant New Year's Eve of their lives. Even for the poorest family, there wouldn't be a single chicken, duck, or fish missing. The family didn't lack money. It was fine to be frugal during normal times, but now wasn't the time to be frugal. He moved a small stool and sat in the corner to prepare the fresh fish that he bought this morning. How could such a grand occasion miss out on sweet and sour fish? Xiao Huan added firewood to the stove. Rui blanched the cut meat in the water before scooping it out and placing it on a plate for later use. Beside the table, Rui's knife danced in the air, and the tofu was cut into triangular shapes with uniform size and thickness. This was the only work she could do in the kitchen. Tonight, apart from Miss Liu, everyone would be able to cook 2 dishes. Xiao Huan had already been trained by Li Yi. In this world, she had already become an existence of the level of a chef. Needless to say, Rui's cooking skills couldn't even be compared to Li Yi's. In just a short while, the table was filled with dishes. In the past, it was Xiao Huan or Rui who cooked. Li Yi and Rui only needed to move their mouths. Perhaps it was because the three people in the family were cooking and she was the only one standing at the side waiting for dinner. Mississippi Lou insisted on showing off her cooking skills. In the end, there was a plate of black substance in the middle of the table of delicious dishes. Lee found it hard to imagine that the black substance was Lou Rui's fried chicken chops. She had clearly covered the chicken in flour and fried it in oil before scooping it out. Such a simple procedure had resulted in such a product when it came to Lou Rui. Lee picked up the chopsticks and praised Rui's soup. The heat was just right. Xiao Huan's cooking skills had improved again, but she was unwilling to touch the charred substance. Try the dishes I cooked. Mississippi Lou picked up a piece of chicken chops and put it in Xiao Huan's bowl. Her eyes were fixed on him. Xiao Huan's pretty face turned pale. The thing she worried about the most had happened. She ran away quickly with the excuse of stomachache. Seeing that Rui's eyes were already looking at him, Li's expression changed. Before he could react, there was an extra piece of black substance in his bowl. Mississippi Lou obviously didn't intend to let him go. It was her first time to cook. If he disgraced her this time, she might take revenge on him next time. Weighing the pros and cons, he felt that it was nothing to eat a little charred food. Eating charred food could make him rich. This was the principle his grandma told him when he was a child. Although it had never worked, maybe it would work here. A good fried chicken chops tasted like charred food. Li had a new evaluation of Mississippi Lou's cooking skills. Such a girl could only be married in the future. In this world, a girl who couldn't cook would be driven out by her family the next day. How is it? Lou Rui looked at him and asked. Not bad. Li picked up another piece and put it in her bowl. He said, you try it. After tasting her masterpiece, Mississippi Lou went to rinse her mouth with a gloomy face. After Xiao Huan came back, she quickly put the charcoal back when she was not there. She patted her little chest and looked like she still had a lingering fear. After rinsing her mouth, Mississippi Lou threw those things into the dustbin and didn't mention anything about cooking. After dinner, there were more activities. Xiao Huan and a few close friends were carrying out some secret activities. Li lit the fireworks, which caused the naughty children to scream around him. There were explosions in the sky from time to time. Since he could remember, it was the first New Year's Eve without the Spring Festival Gala. It passed just like that. When the bell rang in the distant night, history turned to a new page. Time officially entered the second year of Jinghe. Li carried the little servant girl who was sleeping on the night of the new year and gently placed her on the column. After covering her with a quilt, he quietly left. The fireworks in the distance were still brilliant. There was no ban on setting off fireworks and firecrackers here, and there was no need to worry about the haze. Li stood under the porch and looked at the night sky in the distance. He didn't look away for a long time. The last time he saw something like this, it wasn't this sky. A long robe was draped over his body. Li retracted his gaze. When he turned around, he embraced the woman in front of him. Under her slightly startled gaze, he held her hand and led her into the room. Chapter 281. When he was washing up in the morning, Li found some blood under his nose. Recently, he was indeed a little angry. After a few nights of improving their relationship, he could even sleep in the same bed with Rui at night. However, every time he was about to reach the last step, she would sleep in another bed. This was a sin. Li even suspected that she was deliberately teasing him, but he could only sigh in his heart. When would these days come to an end? During the spring festival in the previous years, he had to visit his relatives and friends from the second day of the new year. He had to give money to the younger generation until his hand retired. This year, he didn't have to go through this process. He came here alone. Although he was from the Li family village, he didn't remember the past. It was not an exaggeration to say that he was unfamiliar with the place and didn't have any sense of belonging there. Rui also didn't have any relatives here, so he spent the spring festival very leisurely. From the third day of the new year, the girl named Yang Liuqing would appear at home on time. She was diligent and would appear wherever there was work. She would come early in the morning and only go back at night. She had completely put on the identity of a servant. It seemed that she wanted to use this method to impress Rui. Sometimes when Rui was practicing, she would stare at him without blinking. Rui also didn't chase him away, which made Li Yi feel a little strange. He didn't know what she was thinking, but he didn't intend to care. Whether she accepted a disciple or not was her business. These days, he had his own things to do. This half a month was the busiest period of time in Qing and Prefectural City. All officials, big and small, could not take a break. As the county magistrate, maintaining the security of the city was his main responsibility. The frequency of patrols on the streets had obviously increased. Every day, they would deal with a few small cases. Fortunately, there were no major murders. With Lu Yi around, his subordinates could handle everything. When there was nothing to do, Li Yi would drink tea and read books in the county government office. It was extremely worry-free for the county lieutenant to do this. Daniel had been walking back and forth in front of Li Yi for a while, which annoyed Li Yi. Since he could get out of bed after his wounds got better, he ran to the government office to report. In addition to going to the brothel, he was also honest. However, no matter how honest he was, Li Yi wouldn't allow him to keep walking in front of him. He put down the book, patted the table, and said, "If you want to walk, go outside. Arrestor Lu needs people. If you have nothing to do, go and help him." Daniel finally stopped and said with a bitter expression, "Sir, Arrestor Lu and a few brothers have been trying to catch that thief for a few days already, but they haven't even seen his shadow. Every night, there are big houses being robbed, so that thief is probably not easy to catch." Seeing that the teacup in front of Li Yi was empty, he hurriedly ran over and filled it for him. He said with a flattering face, "I'd better stay in the county government office. I can still help my lord pour a cup of tea." After spending so much time together, Daniel had already figured out the county lieutenant's temperament. Magistrate Li was not like the previous county lieutenant Zhou, who always had a stern face and often scolded them. The current county lieutenant was not only more capable than the one surnamed Zhou, but he was also very approachable. Even if he saw them slacking off, he would at most give them a kick in the butt. Last time, Milord Li took the knockout drug from him and gave him a lot of money as compensation. He couldn't refuse it. He was not like Zhou, Pixiu, who only gave money to his brothers but never gave it out. That bastard deserved to be put in jail. As soon as Daniel filled up Li Yi's teacup, there was a commotion at the door. Several constables walked in dejectedly. Seeing their bruised and swollen faces, Li Yi stood up and asked curiously, "What happened to you guys? How did you end up like this?" Although constables didn't even have a rank in the county government office, for ordinary people, they were considered half an official. Beating up a constable was a much more serious crime than assaulting a police officer in the future. Not only could they enjoy a free tour of the county prison for a few days, but they could also be given a free beating. It was really worth it. "My lord, that female cat burglar was really powerful. We had already caught her by following the clues, but who knew that she was so good at kung fu? She accidentally escaped," one of the constables said gloomily. Not only did they fail to catch a thief, they were beaten up by a thief. Moreover, it was a female thief. It made them feel a little embarrassed. "Where's Lu Yi?" Li Yi asked. "Constable Lu asked us to come back and call a few more brothers." He had already confirmed the female thief's residence. The constable clenched his fist and said with hatred. Listening to his description, the female cat burglar should be skilled in kung fu. He was afraid that they, who were just dabblers, would not be able to deal with her. The possibility of them being beaten up was higher. His subordinates were beaten up. Li also felt embarrassed. Today, Fong's wife brought Juzi back to her parent home to see her mother-in-law. Fong was idle at home, so he brought him along to suppress the situation. This task obviously made Fong interested. He looked down on the constable's fighting power and strongly recommended Lu Yi to be the constable. If he became the constable, he guaranteed that the constables in the Yamen would not be beaten up like this again. Lu Yi pretended that he didn't hear Fong's words. The position of the constable wasn't something that could be done with a fist. It needed to be done with a brain. He was too lazy to deal with those who only knew how to use brute force. He cupped his fists and said to Li, "Although that female cat burglar comes and goes without a trace, there are always times when she is careless. I investigated a few pawn shops in the city and found that there were a few items that were being traded. They were the items that the rich families had lost. That female thief is also smart. She pawned at a different pawn shop every time. A few of my brothers waited for her for 2 days and finally found her. However, the thief skills were very good, so we suffered a loss. However, this subordinate has already tracked down her residence. Liu Yi brought a few constables and led the way in front. Li Yi and Fong follow behind. With Fong around, Li Yi didn't plan to join the fun. He just wanted to see what the female cat burglar looked like. Taking advantage of the dark and windy night, leaping onto roofs and vaulting over walls, robbing rich families, robbing the rich to give to the poor. This was the standard routine of chivalrous men in wuxia novels. The person in front of them might be such a chivalrous woman. As for Li Yi himself, in the novels, he was a villain who only knew how to plunder the people's wealth and went against chivalrous men. His ending was usually not very good. As the few of them walked and entered the northern area of the city, the houses were obviously low and dilapidated. Li Yi remembered that Daniu's family lived here. "Sir, it's here." Liu Yi pointed at a dilapidated courtyard in front of them and said softly. A brother in plain clothes followed her from afar and saw her enter this courtyard. Li Yi waved his hand, and 2 constables kicked open the door. The constables immediately rushed in, unsheathed their weapons, and looked at the courtyard vigilantly. After all, she had suffered a great loss at the hands of the female cat burglar. No one would look down on her just because she was a woman. In the courtyard, more than 10 children were gathered together, holding buns in their hands and chewing on them. Seeing so many constables coming in, a 7- or 8-year-old girl was shocked and accidentally dropped the bun on the ground. After being stunned for a moment, she immediately picked it up and hid it behind her clothes. "Hey, female thief, you're already surrounded by us. Hurry up and surrender." One of the constables looked at a girl who was about 16 or 17 years old and shouted loudly, "Sister, run." Seeing that the constables had barged in with knives, a boy's face changed and he shouted loudly. A few boys immediately ran out from the crowd. The oldest was about 11 or 12 years old, and the youngest was only 7 or 8 years old. At that moment, they were all baring their teeth at Liu Yi and the others, as if they were going to charge at them at any time. "Why is it her?" Fong's mouth was wide open. He looked at Li Yi with a face full of surprise. Seeing that the children had fierce expressions and were staring at Liu Yi and the others, Li Yi realized that he had actually guessed correctly. Chapter 282. On New Year's Eve, the entire prefectural city was in a state of jubilation. Everyone, including the rich families, let down their guard. Perhaps even the thieves wouldn't want to steal at this time. The heroine who robbed the rich to help the poor took this opportunity to climb over the high walls and steal the people's belongings. It wasn't for personal gain, but to help these helpless children. When she pawned the belongings, she had to be careful not to be discovered by the dog official and his henchmen. If something happened to her, the children would have to beg outside. It was obvious that she had made a mistake in the end, and the dog official led a group of constables to chase her here. Li Yi felt that he was the dog official in the story. It couldn't be more appropriate. No wonder he hadn't seen Yang Liuqing for 2 days. So she had been doing these things for the past 2 days. "Put down your weapons." With no other choice, he could only wave his hand at Liu Yishui and the others. Li didn't think that robbing the rich to help the poor was a bad thing. In fact, he had wanted to do it himself. Moreover, the clothes he changed out of this morning were taken to be washed by others. It wasn't good for his subordinates to point knives at her at this time. "Take out all the things you stole." Li Yi walked over and looked at her. Although what she had done was reasonable, it wasn't legal. She had to give those people something. "No, they will starve to death." The girl looked up at him with a hint of stubbornness in her eyes. She shook her head. Li Yi looked at the dozen or so children behind her. The girls were hiding behind the boys, and the boys were protecting them. They were still staring at him and the others. Although their bodies were still slightly trembling, they were all clenching their fists. Li Yi believed that if Liu Yishui and the others made a move, they would rush up the next moment. Only this time. Don't do it again. He glanced at Yang Liuqing and turned to walk out the door. "Sister, aren't the officials going to arrest you?" Seeing that the fierce officials had left, a girl around 7 or 8 years old walked out from behind and tugged at the corner of Yang Liuking's clothes. Yang Liuking touched her head and said, "Don't worry, the officials only hang up the bad guys. Sister is a good person, they won't arrest you." When the little girl heard this, a smile immediately appeared on her face. She took out a bun from the basket and handed it to her. She grinned and said, "Sister, have a bun." Yang Liuking took the bun from her hand and took a small bite. When he looked up at the door, the figures had already disappeared. "What? Do you think I did something wrong and shouldn't have let her go?" Along the way, he noticed that Lu Yidong seemed like he wanted to say something several times, but stopped. Lu Yi cupped his fists respectfully and said, "This subordinate can understand my lord's benevolence. However, this action is against the law. If word of this spreads, my lord will be in trouble." Li Yi smiled and said, "The law is dead, but people are alive. If we capture that woman today, perhaps those children will starve to death. Reason and the law are sometimes in conflict. How to make a decision? As long as you're not letting your heart down, it's fine." Seeing the county lieutenant walk away, Lu Yidong stood in the same place and fell into deep thought. Reason and the law. He muttered these words, and a trace of confusion appeared on his face. After a long time, his confusion gradually became clear. He sighed. The jewelry that those rich families had lost was stolen by a great thief who roamed the various prefectures. The probability of getting it back was really too slim. Yang Luqing swept the courtyard once again and sat on a stone bench in the corner. She looked at the young scholar who was holding a book in his hands. The strange chair he was sitting on was swaying back and forth. It seemed to be very comfortable. It wasn't until today that she found out that this seemingly weak scholar was actually an official. When she indirectly asked the young maidservant, the other party proudly told her that her son-in-law was a county magistrate and that he was in charge of a lot of officials. Apart from the first day they had come here, the two of them had not interacted much with each other. His impression of the young scholar was that he was lazy. As long as the sun was good outside, she would see him lying on that strange chair. Sometimes he would hold a book in his hand, and sometimes he wouldn't. He seemed to practice martial arts as well. He would practice for at least 2 hours a day, but she didn't know which martial arts he learned. His fist technique was soft and didn't have any strength. Maybe he was just learning it for fun. No matter what, she couldn't associate him with an 8th-rank official. However, he had a good heart. If he didn't let her go today, those children would be begging on the streets. Although she didn't know those children for a long time, since she saved them from the hands of the human traffickers, she didn't want them to go back to their previous lives. That's right, that strange fist technique. Her future master would sometimes practice it, and he never avoided her. She really couldn't understand why she was so good at martial arts when she was the same age as her. She must be her disciple. If she could learn her skills, she should be able to take revenge, right? Li put down the book and looked back. That girl was in a daze again. He didn't expect that she was the female cat burglar. He heard that a lot of rich families in the city had been robbed. At night, when he saw a woman in white flying around on the roofs, he would kneel down and beg, "Ghost, spare me." Those children were orphans. In this era, there were no orphanages. If it wasn't for Yang Liuking, they could only beg on streets. The possibility of starving to death was very high, especially during the winter. This kind of thing was not uncommon. He couldn't let her keep robbing rich families. There would be a day when she would be exposed. If he could find some work for them so that they could support themselves, it would be considered a good deed. When the sky gradually darkened, another day had passed. Yang Liuking came out of the big house. When he was thinking about the 2 moves that he learned today, he heard footsteps behind him. "Master!" She turned her head. When she saw the young scholar, she hurriedly bowed. Li Yi waved his hand and said, "After buying a place for them to live, there's not much left. If we use it sparingly, it should last for a month. If they are willing, we can let a few older people work in the theater, such as assistants. You know the theater, right? Cleaning the tables and sweeping the floor, doing some light work. They should be able to support themselves. If they are willing, they can let a few of the older ones work in the theater as assistants. You know the theater, right? Cleaning the tables, sweeping the floor, and doing some light work. They should be able to support themselves. Li nodded. Chomping Street Theater. Just say that it's my idea. They will help you arrange it. Li nodded. Chomping Street Theater. Just say that it's my idea. They will help you arrange it. Joy appeared on Yang Liuking's face. When he was about to thank him, several figures came over. Li planned to go home and hide for a while. He didn't know how far Li Xian's airplane research had progressed, and whether he had used the Kongming lantern to take the dog into the sky. Based on the current conditions, without the right materials, the hot air balloon thing couldn't be realized. Even if he asked him, it would be useless. I'm leaving. Unexpectedly, Li Xian didn't come to ask him how to fly into the sky. Instead, he went straight to the point, with a dispirited look on his face. Li Yi's expression changed slightly, and he hurriedly said, "Isn't it just marrying a woman I've never seen? It's nothing. It's all the same, even if she's covered with a blanket. Besides, you said that the woman is an outstanding beauty. No matter how you look at it, it won't be a loss. Don't take things too hard. It's not because of this matter." Li Yi's expression changed again. "Could it be that you have an incurable disease? This is a bit troublesome, but don't give up. You are the son of King Ning. What kind of famous doctor can't you find? Don't give up treatment. I'm going to the capital," Li Xian said with a long sigh. Li Yi patted his chest and glanced at him. This old man can't even speak clearly. Go to the capital, go to the capital. It's not like you're going to hell. Do you have to be so desperate and want to commit suicide? Chapter 283. Winter was not a good season to bid farewell. There had been no snowflakes since the spring festival. Otherwise, he could copy Shuo Yingjing's poem for him. Song of White Snow sends Li Xian back to capital city. The north wind blows the white grass, and it snows in August. I'm leaving tomorrow. Tonight, I'll treat you to a drink in Jade's yard. Don't go home until you're drunk. Li Xian waved his hand and said straightforwardly. Li did not understand how his jadeite yard came about. He went to jadeite yard to listen to music. He went to jadeite yard to eat. He went to jadeite yard to drink, but strangely, he never did anything serious there. Forget about Jade's yard. Let's go to Rui yard as usual. Drunkenness would cause trouble. It was okay in his own home, and nothing would happen. But in a brothel, he was really worried about his chastity. Don't be so wishy-washy. What's so good about Rui yard? Let's go to Jade's yard. Li Xian took the lead, and two guards carried Li Yi, who was very reluctant. In Yang Liuking's surprised eyes, they soon disappeared. The night was always the busiest time in the brothels, especially on the 1st and 15th day of every year. It was the day when the brothels competed for the courtesan bell. All the famous courtesans tried their best to get high ranking. This was a great help to improve their fame and value. If they could become one of the top 10 courtesans, they would be pursued by countless people in the following year, and they would gain both wealth and fame. For their girls, all the brothels actively cooperated with the publicity. Prostitutes, who were rarely seen, performed on the stage one after another, which naturally attracted the attention of a group of wolves. When the beauties glanced around, they wanted to empty their pockets. The business of a brothel in one day was comparable to that of 10 days or half a month before. Only artists were qualified to run for the title of courtesan belle. A withered flower could not attract the attention of those nobles. If one of the top 10 courtesans could settle down in his brothel, the next year's wealth would definitely roll in. Every courtesan was a cash cow for the brothel to which he belonged. Within the jadeite courtyard, after passing through the winding corridors and isolating the noise outside, a woman stood quietly by a table in a secluded room. Her wrist slowly moved as if she was drawing something on a piece of paper. Drunken Mo, you can't always not go out to meet the guests. The courtesan competition has already started. Mom is relying on you to make us proud. The Jade Courtyard's madam stood beside her and urged, "Don't we still have Xiang Xiang and Miao Miao?" The woman added a few more strokes on the paper and said casually. The brothel keeper's face turned bitter as she said, "Io, my great aunt, how can they compare to you? Listen to Mama's advice. Go out and show your face. Even if it's just to play a song or sing a few lines, it's good enough. How many young masters want to see you by name? Mom is doing this for your own good. If you don't win the title of courtesan belle this year, your future days will be difficult. Without fame, Mom won't be able to stop those nobles. Got it. The woman sighed helplessly. That's good. Mom will go prepare now. A smile immediately appeared on the madam's face, and she hurriedly retreated. Her personal maid, Xiao Chui, supported her chin with one hand and murmured, "Young miss, I heard that Lu Xiao Xiao of Ichuan Brothel and Lu Yi of Golden Phoenix Courtyard have the most support for this year's courtesan belle. Many famous scholars have written poems to praise them. Young Master Su gave Lu Yi 3,000 taels of silver, and many people are envious of her. Yang Yinzhou wrote a poem for Lu Xiao Xiao, and her supporters immediately surpassed Lu Yi's. Young Miss has never met those scholars. What will you do if you don't win the title of courtesan belle?" The maid's worry was not without reason. The courtesan belle election was obviously based on popularity. If a noble spent a lot of money on a certain lady, or if a talented scholar produced a masterpiece, it would greatly boost popularity. The courtesan belle was naturally the center of attention, and countless men would fight for it. If they met someone they liked, they just had to nod their head, and their marriage would be settled. Those who didn't win the title of courtesan belle would naturally lose a lot of popularity. Without fame, those nobles wouldn't care if you were a virgin or not. Sometimes they would even use some forceful methods, and no one would stop them. A virgin who lost her virginity was naturally no longer a virgin. In the end, she would end up like most prostitutes, selling flesh for a living. Xiao Chui was still murmuring to herself. Zheng Zumo came out of her cage-like room and looked up at the sky outside the window. A trace of desire appeared in her eyes, but it quickly turned into helplessness. "Xiao Chui." The muttering girl raised her head. "Prepare hot water. I want to take a bath." "All right." Li Xian gulped down a cup of wine and stared at the stage, clapping his hands with all his might. After Li Xian's guard presented 2 silver ingots, the girl on the stage, wearing a gauze dress and revealing her navel, danced even more enthusiastically. There were almost no empty seats in the hall. When the 2 of them came earlier, there weren't actually any seats. After Li Xian's guard put his arm around a fat man's neck and said a few words intimately, the fat man smiled and gave up the seat that was supposed to belong to him. As the girl twisted her waist, a burst of cheers came from below the stage from time to time. Regardless of whether it was a burly man or a refined scholar, they all stared at the stage without blinking, as if they wanted to see under the gauze dress. Some even stared at the girl's navel and drooled. Li even saw a guy in the corner with his hand in his crotch. Not knowing what he was doing, they were all a bunch of good-for-nothings. A simple twist of the navel was enough to make them so excited. Had they seen striptease or pole dance before? Even though he hadn't seen it himself, his horizons were at least 1,000 years ahead of them, so he wasn't as unbearable as they appeared. At this moment, he was focusing on the delicacies in front of him. He had to admit that the dishes here had their merits. Putting aside those fancy dishes that didn't taste very good, this dish called Blaze of Colors was actually a side dish made of shredded radish mixed with an unknown substance. It was very delicious and went very well with the rice. "Young master, look at him. He looks like he hasn't eaten for a few days." A chuckle came from the side. Li turned his head and saw 2 young masters sitting there. At this moment, one of the younger ones was pointing at Li Yi with his finger. He was smiling so widely that he couldn't even open his eyes. He spat in his heart and turned his head away. A grown man actually covered his mouth when he was laughing. Perhaps he had some special fetish. If he looked at him any longer, he wouldn't be able to eat anymore. "Don't be rude." Seeing the other handsome young master gently open his hand, the action of a grown man was actually very seductive. Li felt even more disgusted. He couldn't help but move a little to the side to avoid being affected by these 2 traps. Chapter 284. Young Master. That person looks so familiar. I seem to have seen him somewhere. Li didn't want to pay attention to the 2 effeminate young men, but the guy who laughed at him just now said again. He couldn't help but turn his head to look at them. They were very strange faces, and he was sure that he had never seen them before. The 2 young men were very handsome. Li looked at them again, and then he immediately shivered. He actually felt that these two guys were good-looking just now. Ba, they were just sissies. Not only did they look like a sissy, but they also talked like a sissy. He made a face at the guy who pointed at him and continued to fight with the food in front of him. Poof! The young man who had just taken a sip of tea next to him and had not had time to swallow it saw his face. He couldn't help but spit out the tea in his mouth and hurriedly took out a handkerchief to wipe his mouth. Li, who inadvertently caught a glimpse of this scene, immediately felt a chill in his heart. Seeing a beautiful sissy wiping the corners of his mouth with a handkerchief, no matter how delicious the food was, he couldn't eat anymore. Who would carry a handkerchief with them? However, what made him feel strange was how the two little submissives came together. After all, two tigers cannot live in the same mountain. How could a table accommodate two sissy? For the sake of what he had just eaten, Li decided to turn his back to them and sat next to them. Your wife is strict. You have never seen such a scene, have you? Li Xian saw Li change to a seat with a wide view, facing the dancers on the stage, and his face showed a little complacency. Li curled his lips disdainfully. When he secretly watched the Japanese bisexual, he didn't know where this guy was. It was a big scene to show his belly button. If he saw the striptease of the future, he would have a nosebleed. As if he didn't see the disdain on his face, Li Xian tempted him and said, Anyway, you have nothing to do here. Why don't you go to the capital with me? The brothels in the capital can't be compared with here. More than half of the world's famous prostitutes are in the capital. They won't let you down. What's more, once you get there, your wife won't be able to control you anymore. You could do whatever you want. Li Xian tried to use this matter to tempt Li Yi. He went to the capital alone, and he didn't know when he would return. Without Li Yi, when his research encountered difficulties, he might not be able to get any inspiration, and it might be put on hold indefinitely. Bah! It seemed that Li Xian's grimace had made the handsome boy next to him feel dissatisfied with Li Yi. When he heard Li Xian talk about brothels and famous prostitutes in the capital, he secretly spat and showed an incomparably disdainful expression. Forget it. I plan to spend the rest of my life in Qing and Prefecture. I have no intention of going to the capital. I wish you all the best. Li Yi raised his cup and drained it in one gulp. Li Xian was very disappointed with his refusal. And Mingzu was right. This guy didn't have any great ambitions. No matter what kind of temptation he used, it was of no use. He didn't know if Uncle Huang had any other reason for summoning him to the capital other than to complete the wedding. Although the capital was good, it was still more comfortable in Qing and Prefecture. Hey, you two little brothers, you look unfamiliar. You're not regulars here, are you? The handsome boy was looking at Li Yi and Li Xian with a disdainful expression. He thought to himself that these two looked talented on the outside, but their hearts were so unbearable. Suddenly, a figure appeared beside him. When he turned his head, he saw a large man sitting next to him. There was a smoky smell on his body, and he quickly moved to the side. It's the first time I've seen the two of you, but I feel like I've known you for a long time. I wonder what your names are. The large man smiled and reached out to touch the boy's hand on the table. Oh, what are you doing? The handsome boy jumped in fright and immediately jumped away from his seat. He looked to his companion beside him for help. Young master. He actually saw a trace of lust in the large man's eyes. That's right, it was lust. A big man actually showed an evil gaze to two other men. Damn, this man looked so strong, but he was actually a dead piece of glass. It's nothing, I just want to make two more friends. The smile on the man's face became even wider. As he spoke, he reached out to touch the other person's cheek. Please conduct yourself. The young man immediately stood up and said with a livid face. The attention of the surrounding people was originally focused on the increasingly enchanting dancers on the stage. Suddenly, they heard a reprimand and all turned their heads. Why is it him? This guy is here to look for those handsome young masters again? It's a pity for those two handsome young masters. The crowd was clearly very familiar with this large man. Their faces all showed disgust. Some people even moved away to keep a sufficient distance from him. The large man's eyes narrowed. He looked at the two people and said, It's just to make friends. You don't have to go so far. Young master, let's go. The handsome boy pulled the young man's hand and said in a low voice with a pale face. Looking at the unfriendly large man, the young man's face also turned pale. He somewhat regretted sneaking out tonight. Just as he was about to pull the boy away, the large man sneered and blocked in front of them. He said, "The fun has just begun. Don't be in such a hurry to leave." Li sighed and planned to stand up. He didn't have a good impression of the two sissies. He didn't discriminate against the large man's fetish. However, this kind of thing was about mutual consent. There was no point in forcing or threatening them. As the county lieutenant of this county, since he encountered this kind of thing, he couldn't just stand by and watch. However, the human feelings of this era were far from as indifferent as the future. There was no lack of heroes who would pull out their swords to help when seeing injustice. His Highness, who always had a strong sense of justice, was clearly such a hero. "Scram, don't disturb this young master's mood." Li Xian's method was simple and crude. He stood in between the large man and the two people with a disdainful expression. He acted like a spoiled brat to the extreme. A few guards already followed him. If the large man made any strange movements, he would immediately be cut into pieces. The boy and the young man looked at him with eyes filled with deep gratitude. "Oh, this little brother is quite handsome." The large man originally wanted to get angry, but when he saw that the person in front of him was actually a similarly handsome young master, a smile appeared on his face. He noticed that Li Xian's expression was starting to freeze. He knew that this guy was finished. If it were him, he would have already demonstrated a whole set of 18 dragon subduing palms on this man's body. Knowing that the person in front of him was helping him out, the young man hurriedly cupped his hands towards Li Xian and said, "Thank you, young master. Step back." Li Xian's face was cold. He extended his arm and signaled the two people to step back. When he accidentally touched the young man's chest, he lightly patted it twice. He looked at him in surprise and said, "I couldn't tell, but this brother's body is quite sturdy." Young master." The boy watched as the man patted his young master's chest twice. He was speechless with his mouth wide open. As for the young man who was praised by Li Xian for having a sturdy body, he lowered his head to look at his chest. After a moment of shock, he raised his head to look at Li Xian in disbelief. His face was already completely red. Li Xian no longer cared about the young man. He turned around and looked coldly at the large man. He said indifferently, "Drag him out." These days, he had accumulated a lot of resentment in his heart. It was time to vent it. At first, the large man did not understand his words. However, when his shoulders were pressed down and he could no longer use any strength, his face began to turn pale. The large man was dragged out by Li Xian's guards. Li Xian also followed. Li knew that he was angry. This man had appeared at the right time. As for the two young men, they were still standing in the same place in a daze. It was unknown if they were frightened, but they did not move at all. The situation here only attracted the attention of a small number of people. When a deafening cheer came from the scene, everyone's eyes were attracted by the dancer on the stage. Li also turned his head to take a look. He found that she had actually pulled off the light gauze covering her body, revealing two smooth jade arms. She only wore a tube top, revealing her two voluptuous breasts. From time to time, her jade legs would poke out of her skirt, causing a group of wolves to howl. So this was the erotic dance in the brothel. Li took a glance and lost interest. He planned to go out and take a look. He stood up from his seat. When he saw Yang Liuqing and another figure appear at the door, he suddenly stopped and his expression changed. Chapter 285. Master, the jadeite courtier they mentioned just now should be here. Yang Liuqing raised his head, looked at the horizontal board above, and asked tentatively, "Should we go in and look for it?" Standing at the door, they saw a scantily dressed woman flirting on the stage, and the men below the stage were making a fool of themselves. Lu Rui frowned. How could a decent woman go to such a place? She turned her head, looked to the side, and walked straight over. Seeing that she didn't correct her master just now, Yang Liuqing was secretly happy and followed her closely. A scream came from the corner not far away. Several figures surrounded the corner, and the scream was extremely shrill and tragic. After a while, Li Xian walked out from inside with a satisfied face. He stretched his muscles and felt that his whole body was extremely comfortable, and his mood immediately became much better. He let out a long sigh of relief, and when he looked up, he saw two pairs of unkind eyes. He blinked his eyes and said naturally, "What a coincidence, ladies." Li found that nothing good would happen when he met Li Xian, especially when he was dragged to the jadeite courtyard. Rui was at the door, and going out now was no different from courting death. If she caught him going to the brothel to watch erotic dances, he would have no place to hide his face in the future. He slipped away from the table with his waist bent. He couldn't go to the front door, so he quietly went around to the back. When he saw a small door, he quickly went in. Not long after, several young childs swaggered into the jadeite courtyard. A handsome, fair-faced young man shook his folding fan, glanced around the hall, and shook his head no. Another young child immediately looked at the young man in the front. Li Xian also looked confused. He pointed to a table that had been occupied by someone and said, "It's impossible. He was here just now." He looked back at the guards and asked, "You guys, did you see him go out just now?" "No." The guards shook their heads. The young man weighed the folding fan in his hand and said indifferently, "Go in and look for it." The dance on the stage had obviously reached the most intense and exciting time, and the dancers' movements were more open and bold. Shameless. The handsome young man's face turned red with just one glance, and he secretly spat. When he turned around and saw that the young man's face was also a little red, his heart calmed down a lot, but he no longer dared to look at the stage. Damn it, don't tell me there's no back door in this jade courtyard? Who knew how many corridors, how many moon gates, and how many twists and turns he actually returned to the starting point? He planned to sneak over to see if Rui had left. Just as he took a step forward, he saw two handsome young masters walking out from the small door. When he took a closer look, he realized that they were not handsome young masters at all. They were Lu Rui and Yang Liuqing disguised as men. Others might not be able to recognize them easily if they changed their clothes and tied up their hair, but how could Li Ying not recognize them after getting along with them for so long? There was still a distance to the nearest moon gate. It was definitely too late to retreat, and it was a dead end to go forward. Li wished he could use the earth-burrowing technique at this time. Squeak. The door next to him opened a gap, like a strong light in the darkness. After being startled for a moment, Li Yi stepped in without any hesitation. When the two handsome young masters looked over, there was no one in the courtyard. "Who are you? Get out quickly." A panicked voice sounded in his ear, and a girl in a green shirt screamed and wanted to push him out of the door. The tigress was right outside, and only a fool would go out at this time. Of course, the girl's strength was no match for Li Yi. She stood still and said, "Sorry, I didn't mean to offend you. I just want to hide here for a while. Please." Li Yi stopped halfway through his sentence and couldn't continue. Because in the room, other than him and the girl, there was another person. Facing him was a moon gate, and inside the moon gate was a bed. There was a large bathtub beside the bed, and a girl stood next to the bathtub. She was naked, and there were still many water droplets on her. She must have just come out of the bath. Everything was in one glance. Everything was in one glance. At this moment, Li Yi seemed to see the most perfect work of art created by the heavens. His mind was blank, and he couldn't hear the servant girl's screams anymore. The sounds of the outside world also gradually disappeared. Only the figure in front of him became clearer and clearer. "Have you seen enough?" A cold voice came over, and there was an irrepressible anger in the voice. He was pulled back to reality by this voice. Regardless of whether he had seen enough or not, the most important thing to do at this time was to immediately turn around. Li Yi faced the door, and there was a rustling sound behind him. The girl in a green shirt opposite him looked at him, as if there was a flame burning in her eyes. Li Yi sighed in his heart. He had really offended her this time. "I think I saw him going just now." A clear voice came from outside the door, and there was a knock on the door. Li Yi's expression changed again. Yang Liuqing knocked on the door, and a moment later, the door opened. A girl in a green shirt stuck her head out and asked, Who are you people? Is Li inside? Li Xian was the first to ask. The girl nodded and said, Li is discussing painting techniques with my Mississippi. Are you friends of Li? When Li Xian and the other two walked into the room, they saw Li Yi standing next to the table, and it seemed like he was painting. A young girl stood next to him and looked at him attentively. The two of them were dressed neatly and did not look messy at all. It did not seem like they were doing something dirty. Lu Rui's gaze swept around the room. The room was not big, and it was filled with a faint fragrance. It was not bedtime yet, so it was a bit strange to put down the curtain on the moon door. However, it was normal for outsiders to enter a woman's boudoir. Look here, as long as you make a small adjustment to the proportion, the three-dimensional feeling will be greatly enhanced. When you usually paint, you have to pay attention to the changes in the proportion. Li Yi told Zheng Zumo the technique of three-dimensional painting with a serious expression. He turned around and saw Li Xian. He asked curiously, "Why are you back again?" He then looked at the two people next to Li Xian. After a moment of shock, his face showed an extremely shocked expression. "Rui, you too." The brothel keeper rushed in from outside and was stunned to see so many people in the room. She quickly recovered and walked to Zheng Zumo and said, "Zumo, get ready. It's time for you to go on stage." "Sorry, please excuse me." Zheng Zumo smiled apologetically at them and said to the girl in green, "Xiao Chui, help me entertain these guests." "Yes, miss," the girl said obediently. Zheng Zumo walked out of the room. The girl turned around and said, "Guests, why don't you wait here for a moment? Miss will be back in half an hour at most. No need to trouble yourself." Li Yi waved his hand and turned to Li Xian. "I happened to meet Miss Zumo and discussed painting skills with her. Since Miss Zumo has something to do, let's go back." "Let's go." Li Xian waved his hand. He had just beaten up the man and vented his anger. Since there was no big news, he had no intention of staying here. "What's the hurry? Since we are here, let's watch for a while before leaving. This is my first time in a brothel. I won't have this opportunity in the future." Lu Rui looked at Li Yi with a meaningful look and said lightly, "No, it's improper for a woman to go to a brothel." Li Yi refused without even thinking about it. Bringing his sister-in-law to a brothel. What the F***CK was that? Chapter 286. It turned out that Mississippi Lu shouldn't be restricted by the demands of secular women. She wasn't asking for Li Yi's opinion when she said that she wanted to visit a brothel. She was just announcing it, with one hand behind his back and the other waving a folding fan. The temperament of an elegant young master was undoubtedly revealed. Looking at the flirtatious glances of the brothel girls, Li Yi really wanted to yell, "Are you guys blind? Changing clothes and hairstyles, and you can't even recognize the gender?" In the past, he thought that it was bullshit to disguise a woman as a man in TV dramas. As long as one wasn't blind, they would be able to see it. Now, it seemed that he had wronged the scriptwriter. "Young masters, are there any girls that catch your eye? I'll arrange them for you right away." The brothel keeper ran over enthusiastically and glanced at Lu Rui and Yang Liuqing with a strange look. She said to Li Xian with a face full of smiles. With her sharp eyes, how could she not see that there were actually two girls over there? However, this young master used to be a regular customer here. He often came to Zue Mo's concert and was generous. He left a deep impression on her after listening to the song. "Just arrange a good seat. You don't have to worry about the rest." Li Yi waved his hand and said. The brothel keeper knew the rules of this Li in front of her. She ordered someone to clean up an excellent seat on the second floor and immediately brought them over. As for the original customers, she naturally found an excuse to send them away. Seeing Li Yi glaring at him with dissatisfaction, Li Xian made an innocent expression, meaning that this matter had nothing to do with him. Not knowing what kind of tricks Mississippi Lu was going to play, Li Yi couldn't just leave. He simply sat there openly. The brothel keeper was quite good at doing things. The position of his cubicle was very good. It had a wide field of view and could see the whole stage. There were many cubicles like this. The outside was blocked by a bead curtain, so the situation inside couldn't be seen clearly. However, the stage could be seen clearly from the inside. Li Xian casually sat on the chair and crossed his legs, looking very relaxed and content. Yang Luqing had never been to a brothel before, so she was very curious about everything here. Occasionally, she would see women nestled in the arms of those men in the cubicles on the opposite side, and when they were being groped by those men, her face would turn red, and she would not look anymore. Lu Rui seemed to be addicted to playing the role of a handsome young master. He waved his folding fan in his hand and looked down through the bead curtain with great interest. Ever since the woman in the room came out, the crowd seemed to be boiling. It was obvious that she was quite famous. Lu Rui looked back at Li Yi and saw that he was sitting on the chair, staring blankly. Li Yi was indeed. The scene just now was his eyes. Li that, and couldn't be away. He glanced at the figure below, and the feeling in his heart was a little complicated. Although she had appraised a lot of erotic films in her previous life, it was the first time in both of her lives that she had seen such a scene with her own eyes. Even though she had put on her clothes now, the scene in the room just now still appeared in her mind. Listening to Miss Zue Mo play the zither is simply a great enjoyment in life. Although Miss Zue Mo is proficient in zither, chess, calligraphy, and painting, the most amazing thing is her painting skills. Many people want to have a painting, and Miss Zue Mo never shows her paintings to others easily. Although it is impossible for her to get the first place in the top 10 courtesans this time, there will definitely be a place for her. Although he couldn't see the specific situation in the surrounding cubicles, the sound could be heard. Li Yi took a deep breath, picked up the tea on the table, and took a sip, forcing the scene just now out of his mind. The woman could forget this matter very quickly, as if nothing had happened, and he was not petty. Li didn't know that in the gauze tent, Tsing Zumo's expression was calm, but the slight rise and fall of her chest and crimson neck showed that her heart was not as calm as Li thought. It was nothing more than being born in such an environment. She had long been used to hiding her emotions. On the surface, nothing could be seen, but the waves in her heart could not be suppressed. Although she was in a brothel, she had been raised as a chaste person since she was a child, and all the people who taught her were women. She had never been seen by a man. He thought that she would be extremely angry, but the strange thing was that at that time, apart from embarrassment and annoyance, there was no anger. She even helped him put on that show. Now that he thought about it, he seemed to be a little too calm at that time. She was already very proficient in zither skills. Although it was not superb, it could be said that she had reached a high level. However, when her heart was in a mess, the sound of the zither was naturally messed up. In a short period of time, she had played wrong several times. Although she had covered it up very well, for those who were proficient in music theory, it was impossible to hide it. Strange, what's wrong with Miss Zumo today? She has played wrong several times. Yes, is the person playing the guqin really Lady Zue Mo? What? Wrong? Don't talk nonsense if you don't understand. I think Miss Zumo plays very well. There was a commotion in the hall. Tsung Zumo took a deep breath, calmed down, and wanted to play in peace. However, the more she wanted to calm down, the more irritated she felt. Even those who didn't know anything about music could hear some clues. Is this really Miss Zumo? Could it be that the rumors about her zither skills are all false? Indeed, the level that she has shown today is really inconsistent with the rumors. If this matter were to spread out, it would be hard to say if she would be able to obtain the title of top courtesan. The others are all trying their best to build up their reputation. Among them, Lu Yi and Lu Qiao are the most popular. Lu Yi was raised up by the Su family. If they throw out enough money, they might be able to become the champion. Lu Qiao had always been very close to those scholars. Once Yang Yinzhou's poem was sent out, it attracted many scholars to follow suit. So many scholars were willing to support her. I heard that even the #1 scholar of Qing in prefecture, Li Yi, who replaced Yang Yinzhou a few days ago, was also interested in Lu Qiao. He planned to give her a poem during the competition for the top courtesan. Lu Yi probably couldn't compete with her. Miss Zumo doesn't compete at all and has rejected so many scholars. This has already made them very dissatisfied. They will definitely not support her like last year. If she is kicked out of the top 10 courtesans this year, it will be fun. Without the reputation of the top courtesan, it is only a matter of time before she falls into the mundane world. Perhaps you and I will also have the chance to get intimate and spend the night with a beauty. Li Xian looked at Li Yi with some surprise and asked, "You plan to give Lu Qiao a poem to help her become the top courtesan? I don't even know what Lu Qiao looks like. Why would I give her a poem?" Li was also confused. He didn't know where this rumor came from. Hype, pure hype. I think so too. If you give Lu Qiao a poem, I'm afraid there will be many heartbroken girls in Qing and Prefecture. Those who want to become the top courtesan will definitely fight you to the death. Li Xian nodded and said, although many aspects were considered in the competition for the top courtesan every year, those scholars played a decisive role. There is nothing better than a widely spread poem to make them famous. Qiao dances with a soft waist. Zhang Tai Lu, Zhao Yangyan, Yi has been able to sing and dance since she was young. Her actions and expressions are all like those of Chu. Meow Meow hold a wooden board and a cluster of flowers and pearls, singing a new voice. If a scholar wrote such a poem for them, and the poem spread, their fame would definitely soar. If these words were written by the #1 scholar of Qing and Prefecture, the effect would be even better. When the poem was spread by word of mouth, no matter how unknown Qiao, Yi, and Meow Meow were before, they would be known by countless people overnight. Although this #1 scholar was so low-key that many people had even forgotten his name, Li Xian could be sure that if he wrote a poem for a girl, the position of the top courtesan would not be contested by others. They would just go and do what they were supposed to do. Chapter 287. There's something wrong with Zumo today. Behind the stage, the procuress of the Jade courtyard frowned and murmured as she listened to the music. When she was young, she was also the most beautiful girl for a time. She dabbled in zither, chess, calligraphy, and painting. Although she had never touched those things after changing professions, she still had the ability to appreciate them. There was something wrong with the music today. A woman with phoenix eyes next to the procuress waved a round fan in her hand. She glanced down and said, "Who knows? She is the top girl in the courtyard. Even if her zither skills are a little worse, it doesn't matter. There are still so many stinky men who are willing to support her." "Not necessarily." Another woman in a pink gauze dress with a sharp chin said, "Young Master Qin is supporting Lu Qiao this year. I heard that he has written a lot of poems for her. Young Master Zhu just spent 500 taels of silver on Lu Yi early in the morning. As for young Master Xiao," he glanced at the woman with phoenix eyes and said in a strange tone, "Touch your conscience and tell me how many times he has asked to see you this month. Don't think that I don't know what the two of you have been doing in the room. Is it my fault that young Master Xiao likes me?" The woman with phoenix eyes rolled her eyes at her, but her tone was full of schadenfreude. The young Master Qin, young Master Zhu, and young Master Xiao they mentioned were all people who strongly supported Zhang Zumo last year. Without their support, she might not have a place among the top 10 beauties last year. However, during this time, no one knew what had gotten into her. She hid in her room all day, writing and painting. She never saw guests, and even refused the invitation of these 3 young masters. Being humiliated, the 3 of them were naturally dissatisfied. In this day and age, who didn't support was the same. Without Zhang Zumo, there was still Zhang Zumo and Li Zumo. Why should they think too much? What? What did you just say? What happened to young Master Qin, young Master Zhu, and young Master Xiao? Tell me clearly." The procurer's face changed and asked hurriedly, "What else can it be? Zue Mo doesn't want to see them, and they have already turned to support someone else. Mom, if you want to support another top beauty, you have to put in more effort." The woman with a sharp chin said in a weird tone, "Get lost, both of you. You traitors. You don't want to see me do well, do you? If the Jade Field courtyard collapses, the 2 of you will have nothing to eat in the future." An angry expression appeared on the madam's face. She raised her hand and viciously slapped the 2 of them on the back a few times. The 2 of them screamed and ran away. When the madam looked at the figure playing the zither below again, her expression began to fluctuate. Drunk Ink was the star of the Jadeite courtyard and her money tree. At least 30% of the guests who came to the jadeite courtyard came for her. Every brothel would have such a pillar. As long as the pillar did not fall, the business of the brothel would always be prosperous. The reason that the jadeite courtyard could occupy a place among so many brothels in Qing and Prefecture was because one of the top 10 top beauties was here. She was their signature. No matter how good the other girls were, this signature was indispensable. Without this signature, they would immediately become a second-rate brothel. Young Master Qin was an outstanding talent among the talents and had great influence. Young Master Zhu was rich and never stingy with money. Young Master Zhao's father was a judge. If two of the three of them were willing to support her, the position of top beauty would be very secure. She thought that the three young masters would continue to support Drunk Inc., but the procurer's face darkened. Her eyes began to flicker as she looked down the stage. "You don't plan to support Miss Drunk Inc.?" Hearing the discussions around him, Li Xian turned to look at Li Yi and asked, "Forget it. It's better not to get involved in these things." Li Yi shook his head. Every time he threw out a poem, there would be a lot of trouble. He didn't want to get involved in the selection of top beauty. As long as you don't regret it. From the looks of it, Miss Drunk Inc.'s position as top beauty this year is uncertain. But this isn't a bad thing. If she really isn't the top beauty, her value will definitely plummet. If you want to take her back as a concubine, you can save a lot of money. But you have to do this as soon as possible because there will be a lot of people eyeing her. Li Xian still thought that there was an unknown affair between Li Yi and Zheng Zimo, so he kindly reminded him, "If you have time to worry about whether I can get a concubine or not, you should think more about your princess," Li Yi said impatiently. Li Xian's expression immediately turned bitter. He wasn't interested in playing with Mississippi Lu anymore. He stood up from the chair, walked to Lu Rui, and said, "If you've seen enough, let's go." Rui flicked his wrist, put away the folding fan, threw it on the table, and followed Li Yi out. Yang Liuqing naturally followed. Zheng Zimo walked over with the Guqin in her arms and happened to meet Li Yi, who had walked out of the compartment. She nodded slightly and then walked straight over. Many people in the hall were whispering. Strange, there doesn't seem to be many people supporting Miss Drunk Inc. this year. She never accepts other people's invitations. Could it be that she has no intention of competing for the top beauty? Yes, Lu Qiao and Lu Yi have been attending banquets frequently these days. They can't wait to rope in all the rich merchants and talents of Qing and Prefecture. Even if others didn't make such big moves, they wouldn't be like Miss Drunk Inc., not even seeing guests. Could it be that she really doesn't want to compete for the top beauty? That's not necessarily a bad thing. Everyone's eyes are on those top courtesans, so it's not easy to make a move. If she's not a top courtesan anymore, she'll just be an ordinary prostitute who can be combed with some money. Maybe we can have a taste of her. Walking out of the jade courtyard, a gust of cold wind blew in his face, and he became much more sober. Another two people came out. The handsome young man who had just been teased by the big man glared at Li Yi and ran away with the young man. Li Yi was stunned for a moment. He looked back at Lu Rui and Yang Liuqing, who had come out, and seemed to understand something. Looking again at Li Xian, who swaggered out of the jade courtyard and pretended to be a playboy, he shook his head and didn't say anything more. The next day, Li Yi saw a large group of people from Qingming Mansion on the street. The leader of Li Xian's guards rode on a horse and walked to the front of the group. The group quickly went out of the city gate. This guy finally left. Li Yi actually felt lonely for no reason. There was no one to discuss with him how to fly in the sky. More importantly, the dog meat hot pot was really delicious. Yang Liuqing would still report on time every day, although Mississippi Lu still didn't agree to be her master. When she was in a good mood, she would give her a few pointers. From then on, the courtyard would often be filled with whistling sword aura, and it was impossible to bask in the sun peacefully anymore. "Uncle Master, there are more invitations." Yang Liuqing walked in from outside and handed something to Li Yi. Recently, he had mysteriously received a lot of invitations. Lu Qiao, Lu Yi, and a few others he had never heard of invited him to all kinds of banquets. Li Yi always threw them to the side, and now he had accumulated a thick stack of invitations. This time, it was embroidered on a handkerchief. A trace of disappointment flashed across his eyes when he saw the signature, and he shook his head. Miss Ryun of Ichuan Brothel had asked him to compose a poem for her, and the reward was 500 taels. That girl was quite rich. He casually threw the handkerchief to the side. He didn't know how they had found out about his family, but in order to compete for the title of courtesan for a poem, they were willing to do anything. Some gave him silver, some gave him paintings, some gave him antiques, and there were even some who hinted that they could have a night with him. There were also people who tried to save the country in a roundabout way. Even Rui had received many invitations. Chapter 288. Since there are so many invitations, if you have time, it's not a problem for you to attend a few of them. Rui put away the handkerchief and looked at him as she spoke. She had also received many invitations these days, some private and some public. They were extremely polite and vaguely mentioned that they hoped she would bring her husband along. At first, she would tactfully refuse, but after seeing more of them, she was too lazy to pay attention to them. At this moment, she felt that although her husband never attended such banquets, it was necessary to socialize in life. Otherwise, he would offend many people. Her husband didn't have many friends to begin with. After Li Xian and that arresterly left, he spent most of his time alone. I won't go. Li Yi's answer was very straightforward. I'm afraid my wife doesn't know who they are. Their purpose is not pure, and it will be troublesome if you go. Of course, Li Yi knew what their purpose was. It was nothing more than using him to create hype. The competition for the courtesan belle was the most intense. Everyone wanted to have more bargaining chips in their hands. If one person attended an invitation, there would definitely be a second or third person. It was rare for him to have a few days of leisure, so he didn't want to get involved in this quagmire again. Those who should have appeared did not appear, and a lot of insignificant people appeared. So, Lu Rui didn't say anything more. She received 2 more invitations this morning. Since her husband didn't want to go, there was no point in keeping the ox. She might as well get rid of it together. The most direct impact of the courtesan belle competition on Li Yi was that he had much less time to slack off than usual. Before the courtesan belle was selected during the Lantern Festival, there was no curfew in Qing, in prefectural city. The bailiffs also had to go out to patrol at night. Although the county magistrate didn't have to do everything by himself, he still had to sit in the county government at critical times. It was one thing that no one cared about him, but there was a limit to his slacking off. Driven by the festival and the top courtesan competition, the business of the theater was booming day by day. Oldman's son didn't take the opportunity to expand his business. Instead, he took a steady approach and managed several theaters in an orderly manner. He also arranged for the orphans to work in the theaters, such as making tea, pouring water, and wiping the tables. The older children in their early teens could still do the work. Since then, the flying female thief in the prefectural city had disappeared without a trace. When he walked back to the county government, several constables on duty were squatting in the duty room and chatting. The city gets more and more lively every day. It's so tiring to patrol from morning till night. It's so tiring, someone complained. Why are you so stubborn? You've been patrolling for a whole day. All you see are trivial things. You can't stop. You could just find a brothel and watch a performance. When it is time, you could just come back and report. I have to say, the performances in the brothels these days are not bad. Those girls are trying their best to fight for the title of top beauty. They're even using their best skills. Yesterday, I saw a girl whose body was so soft that she could put her head on her, but that's nothing. Guess who I saw when I went to the Jadeite courtyard to see my lover a few days ago? The county lieutenant. I saw the county lieutenant enter a room. I asked my lover later. Guess whose room it was? Who? When it came to the county lieutenant's gossip, the people were obviously interested and asked one after another. You'll never guess. It was actually Li Yi. Couldn't let this guy go on. He walked behind the guy who just spoke and asked, "Aren't you afraid that the county lieutenant will know that you visited a brothel while patrolling?" The bailiff was talking about the county lieutenant's gossip and was in high spirits. He casually added, Hee hee, the county lieutenant won't be able to see it. It's not a big deal to be lazy. Speaking of laziness, who can compare with the county lieutenant? Let me tell you, you'll never guess whose room the county lieutenant went to that night in the jadeite courtyard. You'll be scared to death if I tell you. Halfway through his words, he finally felt something was wrong. The brother in front of him was winking at him. His heart sank. When he was about to turn his head, he was kicked on his buttocks. The constable who was kicked by Li Yi lay on the ground like a dog eating mud. He did not dare to be angry. He scratched his head and smiled awkwardly as he got up. "Sir, why did you come at this time?" Li Yi snorted and said, "If I didn't come, how would I know that you would be so bold to visit a brothel while patrolling? By the way, what did you want to say just now? Go on, I'm listening." Nothing. The bailiff had long known the county lieutenant's temper. As long as it didn't violate the principle, the county lieutenant wouldn't blame them. He said with a smile, "Sir, you may not know this. These days, because of the top beauty competition, the brothel is the most crowded place. It needs to be patrolled the most. We don't relax outside either. There are always people watching on the street. Since you all have nothing to do, go out and patrol. Whoever dares to go to the brothel will be sent to the detention room for 3 days." Li Yi waved his hand and said impatiently. The crowd dispersed in a hubbub, as if they had been granted amnesty. The detention room was not a place for people to stay. 3 days were enough to kill them. With the county lieutenant's words, no one dared to go to the brothel in the future. There was once a felon who refused to confess the hiding place of the murder weapon. The county lieutenant just let him stay in the detention room alone for 5 days. When he was released, the 8-foot-tall man cried like a child. As soon as he was released, he trembled and confessed. From then on, people regarded detention as the cruelest punishment. As soon as they stepped out of the door, someone immediately turned to ask the bailiff who just spoke, Go on, whose room did the county lieutenant enter?" "Sister watching, please persuade my Mississippi in the room." The green-shirt girl grabbed Ruoqing's arm and said with a bitter face, "Miss refused those childs and didn't attend the banquet. Mother doesn't care about her anymore. She has been promoting Chan Miao Miao these days. If Miss can't get the top beauty, what should we do?" The courtesan bell was a natural protective barrier. Without this barrier, the Miss would soon lose her chastity. A has-been courtesan bell. At that time, the life of the master and the servant would definitely be very difficult. Everyone else was trying their best to build momentum for the top beauty, but her Miss was doing the opposite. As a servant, she was already very anxious. Wan Ruoqing patted Xiao Chui's hand and raised her head. She looked at the woman who was sitting there and doing her makeup with some confusion. She asked, "Drunken Mo, have you really thought it through and decided not to fight for the top beauty?" The woman took off a golden hairpin with pearls and jade hanging from it and placed it in a brocade box. She casually inserted a wooden hairpin into it and carefully closed the brocade box. She walked to Wan Ruoqing's side and took her hand. She said, "Sister Ruoqing, how about I work for you in the future? Anyway, when you guys perform, you won't be able to find anyone else to paint the background. Do you think I can be your personal painter? The background you paint is so lifelike. In the entire Qing and prefecture, no one could do it better than you." Wan Ruoqing said with a smile. Then, she seemed to realize something and looked at him in surprise. She asked, "Are you planning to? No one can do it better than me?" Zheng Zumo didn't seem to hear the second half of her sentence. She said, "Sister Ruoqing, you forgot about that person." When she said that person, although she gritted her teeth, her pretty face was covered with a layer of pink for no reason. Chapter 289. During this time, there are people patrolling outside day and night. The security in the city is very good, and there are no major cases. Liu Yi was reporting to Li Yi at a tea stall on the street. A floating corpse appeared in the river outside the Zhang family village, and its identity has not been identified yet. There have been no missing people in our county recently, and we have sent people to investigate every village. At another table a few steps away, 3 men were also talking and laughing loudly. "Have you watched the top beauty competition these days? Miss Xiao Xiao and Miss Yi are competing fiercely. I'm afraid one of them will be the champion this year. In fact, there is nothing exciting about this competition. Last year's top 10 beauties will still occupy more than half of the seats this year. Moreover, no matter who is selected, we can only watch and can't touch them. That's not necessarily true. As long as there is either talent or wealth. Even if it is the champion, there is still a chance to make love. Moreover, we can't touch the top beauty this year, even if we can't touch the past. I don't know why the Jade Yard has been promoting Chun Miao Miao this year, and the Phoenix Perching Building has promoted a newcomer. You should know that Zheng Zumo and Gu Xiaowan were both candidates for the top 10 beauties last year, and I'm afraid they have no hope of being on the list this year. I wonder what the former top beauty tastes like. As the three men talked, they showed a smile that all men understood. Later, no one knew what they were talking about, but their smiles became lascivious and their voices became lower. Your Excellency, Your Excellency. Lu Yi said a lot and found that the county lieutenant did not respond. When he looked up, he found that there was no expression on his face, and his eyes were wandering, obviously absent-minded. He stretched out his hand and waved in front of Lu Yi's eyes. Well, what's wrong? Li Yi came to his senses and asked, looking at him with confusion in his eyes. Lu Yi sighed in his heart. The county lieutenant had something on his mind, so what he said just now was in vain. As a subordinate, he should share the burden of his superior. So he changed the topic and said, there is nothing important in the county government recently, but with the top beauty competition going on, the city will be more and more lively at night. I think we should double the number of people. Well, do as you said, and the others will be selected from the people. Li Yi clapped his hands, looked at the three men who were talking enthusiastically, and turned to walk to the street. Sir, be careful. Just as they reached the street, Lu Yishui suddenly shouted and grabbed Li Yi's arm, causing Li Yi to stumble. Lu Yishui had already stood up and pointed his saber in front of him. He said sternly, "Who are you? Quickly dismount from your horse." Horses are not allowed in the city. Those who violate this rule will be punished with 30 strokes of a cane. The sound of a horse's neigh came from the front. The young knight on the horse pulled the reins. The horse raised its front hooves, stirring up a cloud of dust, and quickly stopped. Li Yi frowned slightly. Places like prefectural cities were crowded with people and never allowed horses to gallop. This person's behavior just now was worthy of being brought back and beaten 30 times with a rod. If he hadn't been thinking about something just now, he wouldn't have missed it even though they were so close. You're a constable here. Great, take me to the Anxi County government immediately. The rider didn't seem to care about what Lu Yichang had just said. Seeing Lu Yichang's clothes, he immediately raised his head and said arrogantly, "If you don't dismount from your horse, then go to the Anxi County government lying down." Li Yi looked at him and said coldly. Even Li Xian didn't dare to let his horse run wild on the streets. Could this ignorant fellow have a more powerful background than Li Xian in Qing and prefecture? Who do you think you are? Seeing that a weak scholar dared to threaten him, a trace of anger flashed across the rider's face. He raised the horsewhip in his hand and lashed it directly at Li Yi. "How dare you?" Lu Yishui shouted angrily and slashed at the horsewhip with his saber. This fellow actually dared to attack the magistrate. The magistrate was appointed by the current emperor and could be considered as an official of the imperial court. Even if this fellow was killed, he wouldn't have to bear the consequences. The rider acted quickly, but Lu Yishui was still a beat slower. However, just when the whip was about to hit Li Yi snorted coldly and stretched out his right hand to grab the head of the whip. With a sudden tug, the rider was forcefully pulled down from the horse. Before he could get up from the ground, Li Yi kicked his waist. The rider struggled for a while and felt that he had no strength in his body. He couldn't even speak. At this moment, he no longer had the arrogance he had just now. His face was full of horror. Letting a horse loose in the city with the intention of harming an official of the imperial court. Bring him back to the county government and give him 80 strokes of the cane. Take him back to the county government and give him 80 strokes of the cane. Li Yi said indifferently. Two constables ran over from a distance and immediately lifted the rider up. Just now, he had used a secret skill taught by Rui. Within an hour, this embroidered pillow wouldn't be able to exert any strength at all. Although Li Yi was not a master, he had been trained by the two peerless masters in his family. It was easy for him to deal with such an embroidered pillow. Yes. Lu Yishui cupped his hands and answered. He was very shocked by the county magistrate's skills. After Li Yi left, he looked at the rider ferociously. Take him back. Just now, he had exercised a little on the street, which was a small interlude. The authority of arrestor Mingzhu was still there. Even if the son of the magistrate made a mistake, the constables of Anxi County would arrest him without any fault. No matter how powerful the background of the offender was, once he entered the county government, he would only be dealt with according to the law. Even if the offender really had a powerful background, the constables wouldn't dare to make trouble for him. Otherwise, it would only cause more trouble. Of course, the magistrate didn't have a son. Therefore, Lu Yishui and the others wouldn't feel any psychological pressure when they beat the guy with a stick. When he returned home and walked into the courtyard, he saw Rui throwing a stack of paper into the stove. When she saw Li Yi coming in, she smiled and said, I received a few more invitations this morning. I figured that you wouldn't go, so I burned them all. Li Yi nodded. When he walked to the door, he seemed to have thought of something and paused. He turned around and asked, The invitations this morning? Who are they from? Lu Rui was stunned. She thought for a moment and said, Lu Qiao Qiao from Ichuan Brothel sent another one. Lu Yi sent 2 and 500 taels of silver, but they were returned by me. In addition, Gu Xiaowan from Perching Phoenix Brothel and Jadeite Courtyard. Li Yi's eyes lit up. Chen Miao Miao from Jadeite Courtyard invites you to a banquet tonight. Lu Rui thought that he had changed his mind. She said apologetically, I didn't know what you were planning. I shouldn't have come so early. It's fine. So be it. Li Yi smiled. A trace of disappointment appeared in his eyes as he walked into the room. Women's minds are so hard to guess. He paced around the room a few times and sighed. He walked to the desk and began to grind the ink. Young master, let me do it. Xiao Huan stood at the door and looked in. She immediately ran over and took the ink stick from Li Yi's hands. Yang Liuqing had almost finished all the work in the house these days. If she saw this, she would definitely fight with her for this. She loved watching the young master write and paint. Whether it was in the past or in the future, this position could only be hers, the servant girl thought to herself. Chapter 290. In the government office of Anxi County, the bailiffs watched the cane falling on the buttocks of the young knight with a strange look in their eyes. Half of the 80 strikes had been done. Besides twitching unconsciously because of the pain, the knight didn't make any sound from the beginning to the end. Although they didn't intend to kill him and chose the fleshy part of his buttocks, he would be able to jump around again after lying in bed for 10 days or half a month after the 80 strikes. However, the pain from the strike of the cane was real. Gradually, the bailiff's gazes on the knight turned solemn. This man was a man. Even Lu Yizhong's eyes changed. When they were on the street just now, he thought that the knight was just a playboy who didn't know the immensity of heaven and earth. He didn't expect that the knight was also a tough man. Let me do it. In order to show enough respect for this man, Lu Yizhong decided to do it himself. He walked over and took the cane from a bailiff. He's a good man. With a sigh of admiration, he raised the stick high and then brought it down. A heart-wrenching sound suddenly sounded. The knight found that he could finally make a sound, and his body seemed to have regained its freedom. Snot mixed with tears rolled down from his face, and he screamed like a pig being slaughtered. The admiration on the bailiff's faces froze. Continue. Lu Yizhong was annoyed. He thought that the knight was a tough man, but he didn't expect that the knight was also a coward. He waved his hand and said, The Lord said 80 strikes. There can only be 80 strikes. No more or less. Whoosh! More than 10 people rushed into the hall. When the first person saw the young knight lying on the bench, he changed his face and said, Stop. County Magistrate Lu came in with an old man and asked with a frown, What's going on? Lu Yizhong cupped his hands and said, Your Excellency, This man rode his horse recklessly on the street and tried to attack the county magistrate. According to the law, he should be beaten 80 times. He has already been beaten 60 times. Rode his horse on the street and attacked County Magistrate Lee? County Magistrate Liu glanced at the young knight and said lightly, "Then continue to beat him. We'll talk after that." Seeing County Magistrate Liu's attitude, Liu Yi knew that County Magistrate Liu's background might not be so powerful. After responding, he turned around and said to the Yamen runner, "Continue." The man who looked like a guard was about to speak, but the old man beside County Magistrate Liu waved his hand and said, since he has made a mistake, he should be punished. Then he looked at County Magistrate Liu and said with a smile, "About the matter I just mentioned, Registrar Zhang is not here. Liu Yi, take this old man to the household," County Magistrate Liu said. "Thank you, Lord Liu." The old man cupped his hands and said. Liu Yi nodded. Half of the people that the old man brought stayed here, while the other half followed Liu Yi to the house. The household register was where the household register was kept. When they reached the door, Liu Yizhong turned around and said, "Only 2 people can enter. The rest of you can wait outside. Li Zheng, come in with me. The others wait outside." The old man smiled, pointed to the man in the lead, and walked in with him. Liu Yi stood outside. Naturally, there were scribes inside to greet them. Looking at the travel-worn people standing in the yard, he felt bored and habitually used the reasoning method that the county magistrate taught him to reason. These people seemed to have traveled for a long time and were definitely not from Qing and prefecture. They were arrogant and dared to be so arrogant in the prefectural city, so they definitely did not come from a small place. Most likely, they came from the capital. Combined with County Magistrate Liu's attitude, this possibility immediately increased to 80%. Beside the desk, the little servant girl was slowly grinding ink, but her eyes were staring at Li Yi's hand. She watched as small square characters appeared on the white paper. Although the son-in-law had taught her to read a long time ago, she could only recognize a few words on the paper, such as beauty and under the moonlight. However, it did not matter if she did not recognize them. Looking at those beautiful words appearing on the paper made her feel inexplicably comfortable. Li Bai did not have time to be born. This should not be a problem. Cao Cao actually had 3 sons, but none of them were called Cao Ji or Cao Pai. This song is so famous, but I don't have any impression of it, so there's no more. After writing for a while, Li would stop and murmur a few words. In his mind, information about this world kept flashing by. After filtering, he started writing again. Xiao Huan looked strangely at the son-in-law who was talking to himself. After grinding the ink, she saw the son-in-law hammering his shoulder. She immediately ran behind him, stretched out her small hand, and gently pinched it. After pinching for a while, her wrist was a little sore, so she moved a small chair and sat opposite Li Yi. She placed her hands on the table and propped her head up. She tilted her head and blinked her big eyes. Looking at the shaking pen, she let out a small yawn. Every time he was immersed in his own world in his mind, time passed especially quickly. Li could not remember how many books he had flipped through. It was only when he flipped to the last page of the book that he realized his arm was very sore. The light in the room was also a little dim. He raised his head and looked out the window. The sun was about to set below the mountains in the west. He put down the brush and rubbed his shoulder, waiting for the ink on the last page to completely dry. The little servant girl had fallen asleep in front of him. One side of her pretty face was pillowed on her arm. There was still a trace of crystal at the corner of her mouth. The afterglow of the setting sun shone in through the window, causing her entire person to be immersed in the halo. He got up to take a piece of clothing and gently draped it over her body. When he walked out of the room, Sister Rui was sitting in the courtyard and talking in a low voice. Seeing Li walk out, Rui stood up and said, "I saw that husband was engrossed in writing, so I did not disturb you. Dinner is ready. Husband, go wash your hands first." Li nodded and was about to wash his hands when Feng walked in from outside. He looked at him and then at Rui. After hesitating for a moment, he said, "Son-in-law, There's a young lady outside the house who has been standing at the door for a while. She seems to be looking for you. I'll go out and take a look first, Li said to Rui and walked out the door. These days, there were indeed many people looking for him. Without exception, they were all the personal maids and attendants of so-and-so young ladies. Although he did not intend to accept the invitation, it was not very polite to let them wait there. Before he walked out of the house, he saw a young lady wearing a green dress pacing back and forth outside the door. Li paused for a moment, then turned and walked back. The young lady kept pacing outside the door, not deciding whether to go find that person or not. She had come out behind the young lady's back. What if the young lady knew that she had come to find him and was unhappy? But if she did not go find him, how would she solve the young lady's problem? While she was hesitating, she saw that person walking outside. Just as she was about to summon her courage, she saw that after seeing her, he actually ran back. It was obvious that he was avoiding her. She pouted and pointed at his back, feeling wrong to the point of tears. Bad person, lecher, heartless. Tears welled up in her eyes, but they did not fall. The young lady endured the grievances in her heart and vented all of her resentment on the small tree by the wall. What are you doing? A confused voice came from the door. The young lady suddenly turned her head and saw that the bad person was standing at the door, looking at her with a surprised expression. This is for you. He did not intend to ask about the grudge between the young lady and the tree. He walked over and handed her a thin book in his hand. The young lady's leg was in the air, and there were still tears in her eyes. She stared at Li in a daze, momentarily forgetting to reach out to take the book. In the Anchi County government, Lu leaned against the door of the household office with a tree branch in his mouth. He looked into the room again in confusion. What was that old man looking for in there? He was so old, yet he was kneeling and crying inside. The scribe of the household office was scared silly. Chapter 291. I snuck out on my own. Don't tell our young miss. The girl named Xiao Chui trotted away. Seeing her back disappear at the end of the alley, the words she said before she left rang in Li Yi's ears again. This woman, what the hell is she doing? Li Yi rubbed his eyebrows and murmured. With her personality, it was impossible for her to give up on herself. What was the point of her inaction? It was actually Xiao Chui who sneaked over that made him realize that Zheng Zumo's situation had reached such a point. Was it because she was thin-skinned? However, regardless of whether what happened that night happened or not, Li Yi couldn't watch her passively accept that fate. If what Li Xian said was right, with those things, the problem should have been solved by now, right? But why did he still feel irritable for no reason? Young master, it's time to eat. Xiao Huan's voice faintly came from inside. Li temporarily suppressed the chaotic thoughts in his heart, turned around, and walked back. The girl named Xiao Chui held the book tightly in her arms and ran out of the alley. The crowd on the street began to thicken. She slowed down and carefully took the book out of her arms. She flipped through a few pages and saw the dense handwriting on it. A smile immediately appeared on her pretty face. It seems that bad guy isn't that bad after all. She murmured to herself, bought a stick of Tonghalu on the street, and skipped forward. She had been with the young miss since she was a child. Although the young miss knew nothing about zither, chess, calligraphy, and painting, at least she learned words and poems from the young miss. That bad guy was no longer a bad guy. That young master's poems were amazing. Last time in that garden, he scared so many people. I also heard that those who wanted to compete for the top courtesan cried and begged him to write poems for them. Last time, when her mother gave Chun Miao Miao 500 taels of silver and asked her to find that young master, she heard everything. What right did she, Chun Miao Miao, have to make that young master write a poem? She hadn't even ascended to become a phoenix yet. Recently, she had been saying those weird things in front of young Mississippi. If it wasn't for young Miss stopping her, she would have torn her mouth apart. Wasn't it just because her mother wanted to make her a top courtesan? She wasn't as pretty as Miss, and her talent was far from Miss's. More importantly, had she ever let that young master see her body? You can't compare to Miss in anything, and you still want to be the courtesan queen? Dream on. There were also those people who begged him to write poems, but they couldn't. She hadn't even opened her mouth today, but she had already gotten what they dreamed of. It could be seen that the young master still cared about her miss. Thinking of this, Xiao Chui's heart was even happier. She sneaked into the jade courtyard from the back door. Miss had just gone out to look for sister watching, so she had a chance to sneak out. She gently pushed the door open and heard a familiar voice. Xiao Chui, where did you go? She hurriedly hid the things in her arms. If Miss found out, she would definitely ask her to return them. She grinned, revealing 2 rows of white teeth, and said, Miss, I just went out to buy 2 skewers of candied haws. I'll give you one. The sky was already completely dark. Finally, there was movement from inside. Lu Yizhong spat out the dried twig in his mouth and saw the old man and the young man walking out of the house. Sorry for the trouble. The old man cupped his hands and said, Old man, did you find what you wanted? Lu Yizhong asked curiously. Lu Yizhong guessed that seeing how sad the old man was, he must have found what he wanted. Moreover, the result didn't seem to be very satisfactory. The old man didn't directly answer. Instead, he smiled and asked, Dare I ask this constable, is all the household registration of this county in here? Is there any missing? I can't say that all the household registration is here, but there shouldn't be much difference. Lu Yizhong replied. Some time ago, he had brought his brothers to check the population of each village. Except for those who hid in the mountains, the household registration of each village would be the same as the number of people. There shouldn't be any difference. Thank you. The old man smiled kindly. He pointed at the young man who was beaten today and was being supported by 2 guards. He said to Lu Yizhong, I didn't discipline my subordinates well. He has just arrived at your mansion and has already made such a big mistake. I don't know. Lu Yizhong waved his hand and said, Since you have already punished him, you can take him away. Just remember not to ride the horse in the town. County Magistrate Lu obviously didn't want to have a deep grudge with these people. He had specially told Lu Yizhong these things during the day. He believed that the county lieutenant wouldn't say anything. Seeing this group of people leaving the county government, Lu Yizhong stretched his body. It was time for him to go out and patrol. Otherwise, his subordinates would definitely take the opportunity to be lazy. He stretched his back and felt a little less tired. Fortunately, there were only a few days left before the upper era. After the upper era, there would be a curfew in the town again. He wouldn't have to suffer at night anymore. Uncle Li, are we going to the village now? The old man walked out of the county government with more than 10 guards. The man called Li Zheng turned his head and asked. The old man called Uncle Li looked up at the sky and said, Let's find an inn to stay in first. We'll talk about it tomorrow morning. He turned his head and looked at the tall gate of the county government again. His face showed a strong sadness that couldn't be melted. Early the next morning, a group of people led horses out of the town. More than 10 guards quickly got on the horses. One horse pulled the carriage and galloped in a certain direction. An hour later, a group of strange guests came to the Li family village. It was strange, but it was because these people were all riding tall horses and they looked travel-worn, as if they had traveled for a long time. Outsiders came to this remote and desolate place, and most of them were poor relatives of some family in the village. When had there ever been such a scene? What brings you to the Li family village? Seeing these people get off the horses, the old man of the Li family village walked over and asked with cupped hands. He secretly winked at the Dazhuang brothers who were not far away. When they didn't know the purpose of these outsiders, it was always good to be vigilant. Old brother, this is the Li family village, right? Looking at the kind old man in front of him, who didn't seem to be looking for trouble, the village head was slightly relieved and said, This is the Li family village. Old brother, do you know Li Minghan? Li Minghan. So they are here to find someone. The village head murmured this name. He had some impression of this name, but he couldn't think of it at the moment. The people in the village were all uneducated, boorish people. Their names were Zhuang, Zhuang, Ergo, Sanpao, and so on. Li Minghan, such an elegant name, didn't seem like something the villagers could come up with. At this moment, another old villager murmured, Li Minghan, is this the name of Li Xiucai? The village head slapped his forehead and suddenly realized something. How could I forget about Li Xiucai? He turned his head to look at the old man and said, "Yes, there was such a person in the village. He moved here with his wife 20 years ago and later settled down in the village. He was the only Shiotsai in the village, but he has been dead for many years." "Is he the one you are looking for?" 20 years ago, yes. Hearing the village head's description, 2 lines of turbid old tears fell from the old man's eyes. He choked and said, "Young master, I'm late." Chapter 292. Young master, this old servant should have stopped you back then. Beside a lone grave at the end of the Lee family village, a dozen or so figures stood solemnly. The old man with the surname Lee stroked the cold and rough tombstone, his expression sorrowful and full of self-blame. Not far behind the crowd, the villagers of the Lee family village gathered in groups of 2s and 3s, discussing in low voices. Are these nobles really here to see Scholarly? That old man called himself this old servant. Could it be that Scholarly was also from a wealthy family? Do you even need to ask? If he wasn't from a wealthy family, how could he have so many attendants on horseback and armed with swords? The first time I saw Scholarly, I knew he wasn't an ordinary person. Of course, my second son was working in a tailor shop at that time. He said that the clothes on Scholarly were enough for us to eat for several years. And that lady from the Lee family, she was so pretty and well-mannered, but what a pity. The villagers spoke one after another, fully unleashing their imaginations. Gossiping was human nature, especially for these uneducated villagers who liked to squat under the locust tree at the entrance of the village and gossip when they had nothing to do. In just a short while, several versions of Scholar Lee's story had circulated. Some time ago, a brothel had been built on an empty plot of land not far from the village. The villagers who had nothing to do would sometimes go there to listen to the stories. At this time, the storytellers had mixed the stories together and created a new and moving story. The lady of the Lee family was originally the daughter of a rich and powerful family. In order to resist the marriage arranged by her family, she eloped with her lover and escaped thousands of miles away. To avoid being found by her family, she lived in seclusion in such a remote mountain village. She lived a simple life with tea, rice, oil, and salt. She hid for 10 years until the couple passed away. 20 years had passed, and the lady's family had declined, while the lover's family had risen day by day. Now, the lover's family had finally found traces of the couple and happily wanted to bring them back. However, they could only lament at the lonely grave. What a sad story. Of course, the story did not end here. The woman's family, who had previously suppressed the couple, did not expect that 20 years later, the young Mrs. Child would become a great person and be personally rewarded by His Majesty. In just a few years, he rose to the top and was ranked in the imperial court. When he learned of his parents' past, he flew into a rage and swore to clear the name of his parents. Yep, I'll write it like this. If I sell it to the theater, I'll be able to earn quite a bit of money. The head of the Lee family sighed and patted the old man's shoulder. The world is unpredictable. My condolences, old brother. Suppressing the images that appeared in his memory once again, the old man wiped away his tears with his sleeves and looked at the village head with a smile. Old brother, can you tell me about what happened to him during these years? Of course that's not a problem. The village head nodded and stroked the beard on his chin. A look of reminiscence appeared on his old face as he slowly said, "This matter, we have to start from 20 years ago. When I first saw them, I knew that they were not ordinary people. I'm afraid that they came from some incredible place. At first, they didn't know how to do farm work. In the end, my son couldn't stand it anymore and went to help." As the village head spoke, the bitterness on the old man's face deepened. Although the Lee family could not be considered a wealthy family, 20 years ago, when the husband was still alive, the young master, as the eldest grandson of the direct line of descent, had lived a life of luxury since young. When had he ever suffered like this? One could imagine what kind of life he had led all these years. The wife of the Lee family passed away early. Scholar Lee raised a child by himself until he was over 10 years old before he passed away. That child is very promising, child. The old man grabbed the village head's arm and asked excitedly, "Young master has a child?" The village head nodded and said, "If he doesn't have a child, I'm afraid that when the wife of the Lee family passed away, Scholar Lee followed her." The old man with the surname Lee was no longer concerned about why he did not find out that the young master had a child in the household office yesterday. He hurriedly asked, "Where's the child now?" Li Yi busied himself in the kitchen. Ever since Xiao Huan inherited some of his culinary skills, Li Yi rarely came to the kitchen. Eggs, sugar, milk. Li Yi used chopsticks to stir in a large bowl while Xiao Huan helped him. The ingredients and steps to make butter were very simple. However, milk was not easy to find. People in this era did not drink it often. It took Li Yi a lot of effort to find a small jar of milk. Without light butter, he could only settle for the next best thing. After tasting it with chopsticks, he found that it was sweet. Of course, the taste could not be compared to real butter, but it was passable. "Young master, is it delicious?" The servant girl blinked her eyes and looked at him. "If you want to eat it, go get a spoon yourself. Remember not to eat too much, or you'll get fat." Li Yi could tell what she was thinking at a glance and waved his hand. He got some butter on his hand and planned to go out and get some water to wash it. Rui's birthday was coming up soon. He originally planned to make a butter cake, but he did not have enough ingredients and tools. If he made it too ugly, it would have the opposite effect. So, Li Yi decided to make a new plan. After wiping his hands and returning to the kitchen, he saw that Mississippi Lou was also eating the butter with a spoon. He walked over and shook his head. "That's not how you eat butter." Xiao Huan raised her head and looked at him in confusion. Didn't the young master just tell him to eat it with a spoon? "First, you have to wash your hands." Li Yi raised his hands and scooped a spoonful of butter into his palm. He shook it in front of Mississippi Lou. Under her confused and curious gaze, he quickly smeared the butter on her pretty face. Because they were too close, Mississippi Lou was waiting for Li Yi to tell her how to eat it. Before she could react, Li Yi's figure had already disappeared from the kitchen. "Ah, this is the correct way to use butter." Bang! An arrogant laughter came from outside the door. Mississippi Lou's beautiful eyes were full of anger. She bent 2 fingers slightly, and the wooden spoon broke into 2 halves in her hand. "Ha! Second miss your face." Xiao Huan looked at her and laughed. After Lu Rui glared at her, she immediately covered her mouth and smiled from her eyes. Li Yi walked out of the yard in a happy mood. Considering her face, Mississippi Lou would definitely wash her face before coming out. At that time, he might have almost reached the county government office. Life should be fun like this. Occasionally, it was a good thing to let Mississippi Lou, who only knew how to make trouble for him, suffer. Humming a light tune, he couldn't help but be stunned when he walked out of the door. "Uncle Lee, why are you here?" Li Yi looked at the Lee family's villager standing at the door and asked in confusion, "Your Excellency, why did you move here? If it weren't for Arrestor Liu, I wouldn't have found this place." The villager said with a smile. There were 2 other people standing beside the villager. Before Li Yi could say anything, the old man on the right suddenly became extremely excited and murmured, Yes, it must be him. He looks 70% similar to young master when he was young. His eyes are so lively. He must have taken after Miss He." The old man suddenly took a step forward and grabbed Li Yi's arm. He looked him up and down. Because he was too excited, even his voice was trembling. "What are you doing?" Seeing a man grabbing his son-in-law at the door from a distance, Fong strode over and shouted harshly. Chapter 293. Li Yi's words were stuck in his throat before he could say them out. What, young master and Miss He? What was the old man talking about? Why couldn't he understand a single word? "Hey, what are you doing?" Seeing that the old man was pulling his son-in-law, Fong walked over quickly and wanted to pull him away. The young man beside the old man frowned slightly. In order to avoid affecting the touching scene of Uncle Lee and the young master recognizing each other, he stepped forward and blocked in front of the big man who didn't know what to do. Bang! Fong raised his hand and slapped the guy who was blocking the way away. He found that the old man just now had let go of his son-in-law. The young man got up from the ground and rubbed his still aching chest. He looked at Fong as if he was looking at a monster. It's good that you found him. It's good that you found him. God has eyes and still left the roots for the direct descendants of the Leaf family. The old man's worried expression was swept away, and he said with a laugh. At this time, Lee had faintly realized that the situation was not very good, especially when the old man grabbed his arm again and said affectionately, "Young master, I finally found you." "Old man, have you mistaken me for someone else?" Lee looked at him and asked suspiciously. "I'm not mistaken. I can't be mistaken. Young master and young master looked too much alike when you were young. This old servant will not be mistaken. If old madam knows that young master has a child, she will definitely be very happy." The old man was so excited that his beard was trembling, and his gaze never left Li Yi's face. After 3 generations, the once gloriously family had already declined. The younger generation only knew how to indulge in sensual pleasures and had no desire to improve. In a few decades, they would probably be kicked out of the ranks of nobles. The young master was so young, but he had actually received the emperor's appreciation. After he returned, he might be able to revive the Leaf family and restore the Leaf family to its former glory. Looking at the old man's expression, Li Yi knew that it would not be easy to persuade him. He looked at the old man and said helplessly, "Uncle Li, tell this old man if I am the young master he mentioned." "Sir, there should be no mistake," said the village chief with a nod. Li Yi was stunned. He looked at the village chief and asked, "Didn't you say that my father is the only elementary scholar in the Leaf family village?" "Indeed." The village head nodded and explained, "Li Xiaocai is from the Leaf family village, but he settled here later and wasn't born in Leaf family village. There's so many people with the surname Li in the world. How can they all be born and raised in our Leaf family village?" The Muramesa said with a matter-of-fact expression, which made Li Yi want to slap his old face with the sole of his shoe. The old man smiled and said, "Young master, come back to the capital with us this time. It's the old madam's 60th birthday. This old servant is here to take you back, but if the old madam sees you, she will definitely be very happy." Old Fong, who was watching from the side, was dumbfounded. What the hell was going on? Why couldn't he understand what they were saying? While Fong didn't understand, Li Yi finally understood. The Muramesa must have been fooled, or these 2 people had colluded to deceive him, so they made up such a story. Damn, the young master of a big family who wandered outside. Why does this story sound so familiar? Can't the plot be more melodramatic? Right, the old son used to tell these stories often, and it seems that many people have heard them. Maybe this story is the most popular one at the moment. Don't these people know how to be flexible? If he didn't guess wrong, the old man would definitely say, "Go with me. There is a huge family with countless properties waiting for me to inherit." A person with a slightly lower IQ might believe him and happily follow him on a road of no return, but in the blink of an eye, he would be sold to a rich woman on the way, especially a handsome gigolo like him. It was very likely that he would be treated as a target. This kind of clumsy trick was good for deceiving ordinary people, but it was far from being able to deceive the county lieutenant, who came from the 21st century and had seen countless clever tricks of deception. If they dared to talk nonsense again, they would all be arrested and put in detention in the county office. Rui walked out from inside with a sword in his hand. The cream on his face took a long time to wash off. He decided to teach Li Yi a deep lesson. It was useless even if he hid in the county office, or he would be more insatiable in the future. Before he walked out of the door, he saw Li Yi standing at the door, so he strode out. "Go back with me," Fong closed the door. Seeing Mississippi Lu coming out, the smile on the old man's face became more obvious. When he called her young madam, Li Yi said, "Shut up," grabbed Mississippi Lu's hand and walked back, not forgetting to ask Fong to close the door. When he closed the door, he was confused for a moment. Shouldn't it be young madam? Lu Rui was taken back to the yard by Li Yi in a daze. Hearing the old man calling her young madam behind them, she only came back to her senses when he entered the room. A trace of embarrassment flashed across her pretty face. She squinted her eyes and held the hilt of her sword in her other hand tightly. This guy was getting bolder and bolder. He lay on the bed, looking at the ceiling, motionless. He had been in this world for half a year. His parents were dead, and he was alone. His home was in Willow Leaves Village in Rui Square. Here he had a beautiful wife, a violent sister-in-law, and a well-behaved servant girl. He was the county lieutenant of Anshi, and he was in charge of dozens of subordinates at this time. An old man came to him and told him that he was the young master of a family in the capital and wanted him to go back to the capital. It was said that life was like a drama, but it shouldn't be the same, right? Wouldn't it be better to live a peaceful life here? If he was a county lieutenant, then so be it. It was necessary to have such a protective umbrella. Practicing martial arts, watching dramas, listening to songs in the Jade's courtyard, teasing the servant girl at home, teasing Rui, and doing some sneaky things in bed at night. He could live like this for the rest of his life. Go to the capital? Whoever wanted to go could go. He was very determined, but an inexplicable feeling of irritation became clearer, as if there was a voice in his mind. Go and see. Go and see. That is your home. This voice came from the deepest part of his body, and he could hear it clearly even if he covered his ears. As if he realized something, he suddenly stood up from the bed and stared at his hands, shouting, "Is it you? Is it you?" He suddenly felt dizzy, and his heart palpitated like never before. In the courtyard, Rui's sword chi was sharp, and in the room, Li seemed to have gone crazy. Rui stood at the door, and a trace of doubt appeared on her pretty face. She couldn't help but think, did the two of them quarrel? Although there would often be small fights, it had never been this serious. "Husband, what's wrong?" She strode over and supported Li Yi, asking with concern. Li Yi's eyes were red, and he felt as if there was a stone pressing on his chest. He panted heavily. It was the first time she saw him show such emotions. Even when he was angry with her last time, he was still abnormally calm. She didn't know how to comfort him, so she could only hold his hand tightly and said, "I don't know what happened, but husband said that no matter what we encounter, as long as we face it together, we will definitely be able to solve it, right?" Feeling the strength from her hand, Li Yi's breathing gradually calmed down, and his eyes became clear again. He took a deep breath and hugged her in his arms, saying softly, "That's right, there is nothing that can't be solved. Wait here for a while, I will be back soon." Patting her on the shoulder, he strode outside. Melodramatic plot. As he stepped out of the courtyard, he cursed in his heart. Chapter 294. The old man with the surname Li sat on a chair and took a sip of tea. He was not surprised by the young master's behavior. After all, this had happened too suddenly. Anyone else would not have believed it. The young master had grown up in the Li family village. The young master had a grudge against the family and had probably never told him about the family. His reaction was reasonable, but it didn't matter. He had evidence to prove it. He took something out of his pocket and said, "Young master, this jade pendant is the proof of identity of the Li family. Young master always carries it with him. As long as you take out the other jade pendant, we will know." Li did not remember having such a jade pendant, but it looked familiar. He looked at the old man and said, "Wait a moment." He took out a worn-out wooden box from the storage room. After opening it, he rummaged through it. The box contained the belongings of the father of the original body. When Li found it under the bed in the dilapidated house, the box was still locked. If there really was something inside, it must be very important since the original owner of the body did not want to sell under such difficult circumstances. There were not many things in the box. There was a worn-out folding fan. The fan's surface and the fan's ribs had already been separated. There was a small rattle drum, a broken red hairpin, and a jade pendant that was very similar to the one in the old man's hand. When Li took out the jade pendant, the old man immediately walked over and said excitedly, "It's this one. It's this one." He put the two jade pendants together. The cross-sections were completely matched, forming a picture of a Pisces. Pisces spitting pearls. This is the Pisces spitting pearls. The old man pointed at the two jade pendants and said, "Young master, you should believe me this time, right? I'm afraid this matter is 99% true." The old man sighed and said, "Sir, you may not remember, but when you were young and saw other relatives walking around during the festival, you would ask them where they were. When Li Xiaocai was pressed, he would punish you to memorize books outside the door. Once I was 7 years old, it snowed really heavily. I still remember that it was New Year's Day. I heard Li Xiaocai shouting from next door, "You don't have a grandfather, and you don't have any other relatives." That day, Master stood in the courtyard for half the night. The next day, he had a high fever and did not wake up. Li Xiaocai carried you everywhere to find a doctor. He copied books for all the wealthy families in the city for a whole month before he could pay for the medicine he borrowed. From then on, Master never asked about his relatives again. Li had no memory of the past. After hearing the village chief's words, he finally understood why his heart palpitations and irritation had come. A child's nearly 20 years of obsession had seeped deeply into his body, even though his soul had died. Li rubbed his head. In the end, he still did not have complete control over this body. He could feel the desire that came from his bones. He longed to return to his ancestral home and to see his other relatives in this world. They were probably the only relatives he had left. In the room next door, Lu Rui stared at the wall across from her. She had a surprised and complicated expression on her face. Lu Rui sat on a stone bench in the courtyard and occasionally turned her head to look into the room. Her beautiful eyes were shining, and no one knew what she was thinking about. The young maidservant pressed her body tightly against the door, trying hard to hear what her son-in-law was saying to the unfamiliar grandfather in the room, but she could not hear it clearly. Her little face was full of annoyance. The old man with the surname Li sighed and said, "Young master, this time, please come back with me." Young master ran away from home that year, and old madam has been sad ever since. Her health has been deteriorating day by day. If she can see young master, she will definitely get better. Li did not answer his question. He composed himself and raised his head to look at the old man. He slowly opened his mouth and asked, My father and mother, what happened that year? Why did they leave? Why did you only think of coming to find them now?" This matter, it's a long story. Even if Li did not ask, the old man would have told him the truth. He let out a long sigh, and a look of reminiscence appeared on his face. Although my Li family cannot be considered a rich and powerful family, it is still a noble family. When the country was founded, the old master was given the title of a county duke. However, the descendants of the Li family did not have any meritorious deeds, so the title of nobility decreased with each generation. When it came to the old master, the county duke's mansion had already become a marquis's mansion. The old master and the Chen marquis were old friends. In order to prevent the decline of the Li family after 3 generations, he wanted the young master to marry into the Chen family. The young master and the young lady of the Chen family were engaged when they were young. However, no one would have thought that the young master would fall in love with a commoner girl. Even if the old man did not say what happened next, Li could still guess the development of the plot. Prince, princess, commoner girl. One was betrothed before he was born, the other eloped for love. Since ancient times, were there not many such stories? Some time ago, Li had adapted the story of Sima Xiangru and Zhuo Wenjun and sent it to the old man Sunday. Only a few days later, the real truth happened to him, his father. Was there any need to say what happened next? In order to climb up a big thigh, the Li family, of course, could not let their young master fall in love with an ordinary woman with no background, so they prepared to break up the lovers. However, they never expected that after they raised the stick, they would find that the lovers had already flown away. In less than half a month before the day of the marriage with the young lady of the Chen family, the young master and the young master's mother eloped and left the capital. The Chen family was humiliated and furious, so they cut off all contact with the Li family. The old master fainted from anger. After he woke up, he did not allow us to look for the two of them. He only thought that the Li family did not have this unfilial descendant. I have searched secretly for many years and finally got the news of the young master, but I did not have enough time. I see. Li nodded, stood up, and said, "Xiao Huan, see the guests out." The next moment, the figure of the little maid appeared at the door. "Young master." The old man stood up and looked anxious. Li waved his hand and said, "You can go back. Tell them that the young master of the Leaf family has passed away. There is no young master, and you have never seen me." Seeing him striding out, the old man was about to chase after him, but the Muramasa pulled his arm. "I'll watch this child grow up. You owe him too much. Give him some time." At this moment, the Muramasa was like a wise man. Actually, he did not think that the Lee family owed him anything. Even if they owed something, they owed it to his two parents that he had never met. He knew very well where he came from. The identity of the original owner of his body could not be said to have nothing to do with him, but really, it was not that important. The problem was that he could not get rid of the influence of the obsession in his body. He did not know if it was an illusion or if it was because of some unknown reason. He needed time to think about it. The old man with the surname, Lee, walked to the door and cupped his hands at the two women in the courtyard. He said, "Young master, madam, second madam, I will leave now." Lu Rui's hand was already holding the hilt of his sword. Rui patted his hand lightly before putting it down. "Madam, second madam, goodbye." The young man, called Li Zheng, cupped his hands and turned to leave. "Get lost." The old man with the surname Li and the Muramasa had just walked out of the courtyard when they saw a figure fly out from inside. Chapter 295. "Miss, who is that old grandpa? I've never seen him before." After hearing Rui's words and closing the door, the servant girl walked back and asked in confusion. After seeing her, the young master went back to his room without saying a word. His sullen look immediately made the servant girl have a bad impression of the old man. Rui rubbed her head and said, "The young master is thinking about something very important. Don't disturb him." "Oh," Xiao Huan replied in a low voice and quietly walked to the door. After taking a look inside, she tiptoed to the kitchen. It was getting late, and it was time to cook dinner. Li lay on the bed and stared blankly at the ceiling again. The difference was that this time his mind was empty. As he stared, his eyelids became heavy. The north wind whimpered and the whole world was covered in white. "Dad, why do Li Dong and Li Bei all have grandpas? Where's my grandpa?" A young man in thin clothes stood in the courtyard and asked loudly in the heavy snow. The white snow fell on his head and shoulders. His lips were purple from the cold, but the determined expression on his face did not change at all. "You don't have a grandpa." After a long time, a hoarse voice came from the room with the flickering candlelight. "Why?" The young man shivered and his voice became louder. "I said no means no. Don't ask again." The voice in the room became stern. The young man bit his lips and his body began to tremble. He stubbornly stared at the candlelight in the room and refused to take a step forward. The snow became heavier and the wind blew on his face like knives. The young man's legs had lost all feeling. After a while, his body swayed and fell on the snow. At the same time, the door was pushed open and an anxious man ran out from the room. He picked up a young man on the snow and said hoarsely, the young man was unconscious and his forehead was burning. The man carried the young man into the room and quickly rushed out again. He wrapped the young man in a blanket and carried him on his back. He pushed open the courtyard door and disappeared into the snowstorm against the cold wind. "Doctor, my child is sick. Please open the door. Doctor, please save my child. Doctor, please save my child." On the night of Chinese New Year's Eve, the pharmacy was closed and the clinic was closed. The man knocked on the door of several clinics with the child on his back, but no one answered. Finally, just as he was about to lose all hope, the door of the last clinic slowly opened. The white-haired old doctor glanced at him, sighed, and said, "Come in." When the young man woke up from his coma, he saw the man with bloodshot eyes and messy hair standing guard in front of the bed. "Father, I'm sorry. I should have been obedient," the young man said weakly. "It's not your fault, it's not your fault. It's all my fault." The man held the youth's hand, tears welling up in his eyes. "Father, I miss Mother." The man turned his head, unwilling to let the youth see the tears on his face. The young man suddenly smiled. He held his father's hand tightly and said, "Father, I won't ask that question again." The man couldn't help but cry out. He abruptly sat up from the bed, feeling a suffocating feeling in his heart. When a pure white handkerchief was extended to him, he realized that his face was already covered in tears without him noticing. Rui held one of his hands and used the other to wipe away his tears. Li looked at the sky outside and asked, "What time is it now?" "It's almost midnight." Rui looked at him and asked, "Did you have a nightmare, husband?" "Midnight." Li didn't expect that he would sleep for so long. The scenes that appeared in his dream, although trivial, were extremely real, as if he had experienced it himself. Perhaps it was really him who had experienced it himself. Suddenly, a strange sound came from the room. He rubbed his stomach. Rui smiled and said, "I didn't wake you up for lunch in the afternoon. I'll go and heat up the food now." Seeing Rui walk out of the room, he got off the bed, fetched a basin of ice water, and wiped his face carelessly. After being stimulated by the ice water, he immediately became much more awake. He let out a long sigh of relief. Just now, he seemed to have experienced another life. Everything in the dream was so clear. When he thought about it, those scenes would appear in his mind again. "It's you, right?" Li murmured to the empty room. The room was eerily silent, and no one answered. The food should have been heated in the pot a long time ago. Rui went out for a while and came back again with a steaming tray in her hand. She said, "It's very late. You can't eat too much. Just have some porridge, husband." The rice was ordinary porridge, and the vegetables were pickled homemade pickles. Li picked up the bowl and ate with relish. He felt that tonight's porridge and pickles were better than all the delicacies he had eaten before. The pickles were also pickled with a unique recipe, but the recipe was not found in the library. When he was a child, he would run all over the mountains with his friends after lunch in the afternoon. The amount of exercise was huge, so when he returned home at night, he would become hungry again. At this time, Grandma would cook some simple white porridge with pickled vegetables. When the rice was ready and the heat on the Kong bed was almost done, Grandma would quickly finish the meal and crawl into the warm quilt. He hadn't eaten for a whole day, so a bowl of porridge was naturally not enough. At this time, he didn't care about the rule that he couldn't eat too much at night. He took another bowl and soon saw the bottom of the bowl. "Husband, you can't eat anymore." When Li reached out again, Rui stopped him in time. Although he felt that he could eat another bowl, Rui wouldn't let him, so Li had to give up. Rui put the bowl and chopsticks back. When she came back again, Li suddenly asked, "What do you think I should do?" Rui came over, smiled, and said, "Husband, don't you already have the answer in your heart?" Hearing this, Li was stunned for a moment, and then he also smiled. He raised his palm and looked at it, saying, "Well, I've received such a great favor from you, so I should help you dispel your obsession for so many years. After this, you can go in peace." "What are you talking about, husband?" Rui looked at him in confusion. Li smiled and patted her hand, saying, "Nothing, nothing. Go to sleep. Women will become ugly if they stay up late." When he walked to the bedside, he saw that Rui was still standing in the same place, biting her lip and looking a little hesitant. This time, it was Li Yi's turn to be confused. He should be the one struggling. Why was she hesitating? What's wrong? He walked over and asked her, "Husband." Rui suddenly looked up at him. Li looked into her eyes and waited for her to continue. "Let's consummate our marriage." The hesitation in her eyes quickly disappeared and turned into determination. Rui's voice came clearly. In Li Yi's mind, it was as if a bolt of lightning flashed, illuminating the whole world. At this moment, what Li family, what nobility, what young master, what go to the capital, all of you can go to hell. Chapter 296. Let's consummate our marriage. He had waited for this moment for a long time. At this moment, Li had an urge to throw his head back and let out a long roar. Oh my God! She finally got over the hurdle in her heart. Li abruptly carried the blushing Rui by her waist, and, after spinning a few rounds on the spot, he went straight in the direction of the bed. Inside the room, the candlelight flickered. The two people on the bed had their foreheads against each other and their noses against each other. They could feel each other's breath. Li could feel Rui's heartbeat speeding up. In fact, he wasn't much better. He had been a virgin for 2 lifetimes. Was he going to evolve into a real man tonight? Husband. Just as Li Yi's hand started to reach for his belt, Rui suddenly whispered, I seem to have forgotten something. Her voice was so soft that it could not be heard. What is it? Li Yi asked subconsciously. His hand had already reached for his belt, but he was not in the mood to listen to what she said next. Was this the time to talk about other things at a critical moment? I think I had my period yesterday. Li Yi's hand stopped moving and his body froze. He slowly raised his head to look at her and asked in a trembling voice, Are you serious? Rui nodded. She buried her head in her chest and said, Just now, I forgot. When she said this, her voice was almost inaudible. It was not easy for her to muster the courage to take the last step, but she had forgotten the most important thing. Although she was still immature, Annie Fong had already taught her about the matters between husband and wife after the wedding ceremony that day. When a woman was on her period, they could not consummate their marriage. She was already very thin-skinned, and after making such a big mistake, she no longer had the face to raise her head to look at Li Yi. You can't play with me like this. Li Yi fell straight down, and all the hot blood in his body was instantly extinguished. The feeling of falling from the top of the mountain to the bottom of the valley was like riding a roller coaster. It was really King awesome. Husband. Seeing that there was no sound from beside her, Rui thought that he was angry, so she raised her head and spoke softly. Before the last syllable could come out, her lips were sealed. Li Yi held her face and kissed her fiercely. He picked up the quilt and walked out. Husband, where are you going? Rui asked hurriedly. Sleep in the kitchen. Li Yi said angrily and walked out with the quilt in his arms. Tonight, it was better for him to calm down alone. Rui sat up from the bed and thought of what had just happened. Her face was so red that it looked like it was about to drip blood. His courage at that moment had long since disappeared without a trace. If he could turn back time, he probably wouldn't dare to say something like that again. Miss, what happened to young master? Xiaohuan held her little quilt, rubbed her sleepy eyes, walked in from the door, and asked with a pout. She had been asleep for a long time, but was suddenly woken up by young master, who asked her to come to sleep with Miss, and then occupied her place. Closing the door, she walked to the bed and habitually climbed inside. She rolled the quilt into a tube and got in from the outside. She squinted at Rui and whispered, Miss, you are so beautiful. After that, she slowly closed her eyes, and soon there was a sound of even breathing. Rui reached out to help her tuck the quilt, then bent her slender legs and leaned against the headboard, completely awake. She looked straight ahead, but her thoughts did not know where. The corners of her mouth occasionally raised a charming smile, and the blush rose from her neck to her ears. In the kitchen not far away, Li Yi also couldn't sleep. Of course, one reason was that he had slept well during the day. The other reason was that he was hit by the cruel reality after being teased halfway. This night was destined to be extremely long for him. When he was thinking about it, he suddenly realized a serious problem. Before the appearance of the old man from the capital, there seemed to be another voice in his body, which had never happened before. Was it because the appearance of the old man had aroused the deep obsession of the original owner of the body? If the boy's consciousness was still affecting this body, and if he had really consummated with Rui just now, wouldn't it be equivalent to a wretched guy hiding and peeping at them when they were having sex? Thinking of this, his heart instantly became uncomfortable. Bastard! He fiercely punched the wall. Not long after, there came the sound of a cold breath in the dark room. Young master, did you sleep well last night? I'll cook 2 eggs for you. Xiao Huan was in the yard, watching Li Yi walk out of the kitchen with 2 panda eyes. She said doubtfully and took out 2 eggs from the storage room. Using boiled eggs to apply to the eyes could remove the dark circles. This was a special skill that the young master had taught her. Several of her close sisters used this method. When Li Yi was washing his face in the yard, Rui walked to the door. When she saw him, she couldn't help but blush and retreat. She dipped the willow branch in the green salt and cleaned her teeth. She suddenly spat out some mouthwash. The morning sun shone through the mist, forming a rainbow of colors. The old man's hateful face appeared on the other side of the rainbow. Young master. The old man with the surname Li wiped his face. He wasn't angry at all. This time, when he called Li, he erased the word young from the front. The word young master was used to address the younger generation of the Li family. Although there was only one young master in his heart, he was used to calling him young master. After he returned, wouldn't he be demoted in front of the younger generation of the Li family? When do we leave? Li looked at him and asked. A hint of joy appeared on the old man's face, and he said, "The sooner the better." Li waved his hand and said, "Then let's wait for another 7 days." Rui, who had just walked out of the room, blushed again. The old man revealed a bitter expression and said, "The journey is long, and we don't know how long it will take. Young master, if we leave in 7 days, I'm afraid we won't be able to make it for the old madam's birthday." Li cursed in his heart and turned to walk back to his room. These people really knew how to pick the right time. They didn't come early or late. They just had to pick this crucial time. Weren't they deliberately causing trouble? "Young master, the eggs are ready. Come quickly." Xiao Huan came out of the kitchen with 2 boiled eggs in her hands. A moment later, Li was lying on a rocking chair with the servant girl standing behind him. She held 2 eggs in her hands and rolled them in front of his eyes. In the courtyard, the old man and a young man called Li Zheng were talking in a low voice. The latter would occasionally turn his head to look at the sword-wielding woman standing in the courtyard with a trace of fear in his eyes. This time, even if he was given a lot of courage, he wouldn't dare to say the words "second madam" again. Chapter 297. Young Master, time is of the essence. Let's leave tomorrow morning. After discussing with the young man for a while, Elderly walked over and said, "Tomorrow it is then." Li waved his hand. Since he couldn't leave in a few days, it didn't matter if it was tomorrow or the day after. He had to leave early and come back early. He still had business to attend to. "Okay, we'll come pick you up tomorrow morning." After saying this, the old man left with the young man. They packed early and left the next morning. If the journey was smooth, they should be able to reach the capital in 5 days. "Son-in-law, where are you going?" Xiao Huan lowered her head to look at Li and asked in a small voice. Her tone was a bit nervous. Li patted her little hand and said, "Don't worry, I'm only going to the capital to take care of some business. I will be back soon. At that time, I will bring you rouge from the capital. Wan Huaji's rouge and face powder can only be sold in the capital." Last time, Li Xian gave a few boxes of high-quality rouge. It was said that it was specially provided by the palace and was very precious. Only the Wan Huaji in the capital sold it. The servant girl usually couldn't bear to use it and hid it in the cupboard. In the end, it was ruined by rats, and she was sad for a long time. Li originally wanted to ask Li Xian for a few more boxes. Later, he found out that there weren't many in the manor. The last few boxes were all given to him last time. Xiao Huan nodded with some disappointment. Although she had wanted the rouge from the Wan Huaji for a long time, she hoped that in a few days during the Lantern Festival, the son-in-law would take her and the miss to see the lanterns. However, the son-in-law would leave tomorrow. No matter how beautiful the lanterns were, it would be meaningless. Whether it was to repay a favor or to seek peace of mind, no matter what the reason was, this trip to the capital was unavoidable. Even if Li planned to return immediately after the old foreign's birthday, it would probably take at least half a month. In the days that he would not be in Qing and Fu, there were some things that he had to explain before he left. The first thing he had to do was, of course, to ask for leave from the county government. This was simple. Speaking of which, the sick leave that Her Highness had given him had not disappeared. Now that he was working while sick, his salary was doubled. He only needed to inform County Magistrate Liu, and he would take care of the rest. County Magistrate Liu had nothing to say to this county lieutenant, who hardly appeared in the county government. Of course, he would not put Li in the same position as the former county commandant Zhou. Not to mention that their backgrounds were worlds apart. He could not find any fault with County Commandant Zhou's contributions to the yamen. These days, under the instruction of the Magistrate of Qing and Prefecture, the County Magistrate of Qing and Prefecture had sent the county lieutenants to Anxi County, while the County Magistrate of Anxi County had personally come to Anxi County to inspect the working style of the Anxi County government. Before he left, he intentionally left a few bailiffs to stay in the Anxi County government to learn about the reform. The good public security of Anxi County was widely publicized as an example. County Magistrate Liu had been an official for many years, but this was the first time he felt so proud. He walked out of the county government and went straight to the theater. He also had to inform Wan Ruoqing, an old man's son, that they had to stop the expansion of the theater for the time being. They had to manage the current territory first. If the foundation was not stable, there was a high chance that the theater would collapse in the future. Don't worry, sir. With our current manpower, running the few theaters in and out of the city is already our limit. There are many people who want to join us, but they're only doing odd jobs to earn a living. A few stewards are currently training their own people. When they're capable enough, they will be sent out. Old son's saliva flew everywhere. With a face full of excitement, he painted a grand blueprint for Li Yi with just a few words. It seemed that he wanted to open theaters in all the prefectures of the Jing Kingdom in his lifetime. Everyone was busy. Even Wu Er, who had just joined the theater, was no exception. The eldest son of the Wu family continued his business of escorting goods and transporting goods. At the same time, he collected information from all walks of the martial arts world. Anecdotes about the martial arts world and the ranking of the best had been completely handed over to Wu Er. The few storytellers under him used the fastest speed to weave the martial arts world's matters into all sorts of stories. The ranking of the Wulin heroes changed 3 times a day. Its influence was no longer limited to Qing and Prefecture. It was quite well known in the neighboring prefectures. Wan Ruoqing was still so beautiful and charming, but she had become a lot thinner. Li Yi frowned and said, "As for the theater, just let the people under you handle it. You just need to control the overall situation and avoid any big mistakes. Don't work too hard." Li Yi's original intention was to let them use their own abilities to change their poor lives. He didn't expect that the small brothel at the beginning would develop into such a huge organization. Wan Ruoqing's body was already weak. If she collapsed, it would not be worth it. Got it. Wan Ruoqing smiled and nodded. It was beyond her expectations that the theater could reach the scale it was today. Step by step, they had all put in a lot of effort for it. Naturally, they treasured it very much. They handled all the big and small things personally. More importantly, she really wanted to make some achievements and show him. That's right. Sister Ruoqing gets up before dawn every day and doesn't go to sleep after midnight. She has lost a lot of weight these days. The girl named Xiao Zhu said indignantly. Li Yi patted her on the shoulder and said, "From now on, you are Sister Ruoqing's personal butler. Your monthly salary is the same as the other butlers. The only thing you need to do is to look after her and not let her work too hard. Do you understand?" "Yes." The young girl's face flushed red as she patted her small chest and promised, "Don't worry, I will definitely raise Sister Ruoqing until she is fair and plump, just like before." "No, she was too thin before. She has to be a little fatter." Li Yi smiled and then looked at them and said, "I have to go out for a period of time. If there is anything, you two can discuss it. If there is any trouble that you can't solve, go to the county government to find Arrestor Liu." When passing by the gate of the Jade Courtyard, Li stopped for a moment. When he was hesitating whether to go in and say goodbye, the girl standing at the gate welcomed him with a smile. "Child, do you want to come in and have some fun?" Looking at the girl talking and the white powder on her face falling down, Li no longer hesitated and strode away. He was only going out for half a month. There was no need to say goodbye. He had asked Xiao Zui to send the things over. At most, when he came back, he would treat her to a meal and apologize in person. It should be sincere enough, right? When he stepped into the house, Rui was helping him pack up. There was a bulging bag on the table, and she was putting a few silver ingots into another small bag. "These," He pointed at the bag. Rui explained, "They are all closed to change. It is not convenient to use the silver notes. It is a long journey. Husband, bring more silver. It is old madam's birthday. You should buy some decent gifts. Don't be laughed at. By the way, it is inconvenient for me. Let Rui go to the capital with you. I don't know what will happen on the way. With Rui, she can protect you." Lee stood rooted to the spot in a daze as he watched her tidy up and ramble on. She was a peerless expert of her generation, yet she was behaving like a little lady. At this moment, the scene was really like a wife talking about her husband before he went away. It was also a feeling that Lee had never experienced in his 2 lives. The first time he saw the woman who smashed the wooden table with her palm and said, "I am Lu Rui," it was as if it was yesterday. He didn't know when she started to become more and more like a little wife. Chapter 298. You really don't want to go with me? Lee still wanted to fight for it. Now that the 2 of them had just broken through the last layer of window paper, it was time for them to be lovey-dovey and lovey-dovey. When they reached the capital and counted the days, it should be time. If he went with Rui, he wouldn't have to rush back so quickly. It was not easy to have a life with just the 2 of them. After arriving at the capital, they could go sightseeing and make up for their honeymoon. What a perfect plan. However, no matter how perfect the plan was, it couldn't win against his damn aunt. This was definitely one of the 2 words that men hated the most since ancient times. It didn't seem to be called like this in the modern times. In short, as long as it was a woman, even if she was an invincible martial arts master, when faced with this word, she would be defeated. Therefore, the target of the honeymoon became Mississippi Lou. He was suddenly filled with worry about this journey. Lu Rui smiled and said, "This journey is long, and it's not convenient for me to go. You know, husband, the capital is not like Qing and prefecture. Rui is naughty and mischievous. Husband, keep an eye on her and don't let her get into any trouble." No one knew a younger sister better than an older sister. Lee felt that the one who understood Lu Rui the most was Rui. Just based on that sentence of "don't let her get into any trouble," instead of "don't let her be wronged or bullied." Who's naughty and mischievous? When did I get into trouble? A dissatisfied voice came from outside. Lu Rui walked in with a frown. She was very dissatisfied with Rui's evaluation of her just now. No one said you're naughty and mischievous. Mississippi Lu is gentle and generous, virtuous and good at home. You're the model of all women in the world. That sentence made Mississippi Lu blush slightly. Just as she was about to draw her sword to thank Lee for his praise, Lee, who saw that the situation was not good, quickly slipped out. His voice came from outside the door. "We're leaving tomorrow morning. Remember to pack your luggage tonight." Putting aside her character of fighting at the slightest disagreement, Second Miss Lu was really a must-have artifact for home travel. She could be admired from afar to cultivate one's mind, and she could also be used as a personal bodyguard. Along the way, it was inevitable that they would have to travel through mountains and rivers. If they encountered bandits, with their half-baked martial arts skills, they might not be able to handle them. As for the 2 old men, Lee had never placed his hopes on them. At the critical moment, his sister-in-law was still the most reliable. Seeing Xiao Huan sitting alone in the courtyard in a daze, he had long gotten used to her nagging. Suddenly realizing that he hadn't heard her voice for more than half a month, he still felt a little uncomfortable. He slowed down his footsteps and quietly approached her from behind. Suddenly, he reached out and covered her eyes. "Ah!" The servant girl let out a cry of surprise. After she came back to her senses, she removed Li Yi's hands and pouted in dissatisfaction. "Young master, you scared me again." She didn't need to look back to know who the person behind her was. The only person in the family who would play such a boring game with her was the young master. "Let's go." Li rubbed her head and said, "Where are we going?" The servant girl raised her head and asked, "I'll take you out for a walk." Okay. "Young master, wait for me. I'll come out after I change my clothes." The servant girl hurriedly stood up and ran to the room as she spoke. "Sister, do you really want me to go to the capital with you?" In the room, Lu Rui looked at Rui and asked, Why? You don't want to go? Rui said as she packed her luggage, then let Uncle Fong go. Uncle Fong talked to me about this morning. He said that he had nothing to do at home and want to go to the capital to have a look. Since sister wants me to go, then I'll reluctantly agree to protect him. Lu Rui pursed his lips and made an expression that said, I don't want to go. If it wasn't for you, I would never agree. He quickly slipped out of the room. I'll go back to my room to pack. If she left late and her sister changed her mind and let Uncle Fong go, she wouldn't have a place to regret it. She was born here, grew up here, and had never left Qing in prefecture. She had long wanted to see the outside world. How could she give this opportunity to someone else? Early in the morning, he crawled out of his warm bed. When Rui brought a hot towel for him to wipe his face, she told him that the old man had been waiting outside for a while. Yesterday, he had accompanied Xiao Huan to shop until nighttime. Looking at the sky, it was getting late. He carelessly wiped his face and quickly put on his clothes. Walking out of the room, he was slightly stunned when he saw the situation in the courtyard. Including the old man and the young man he saw last time, there were 7 or 8 figures in the courtyard. They were dressed the same and looked familiar. Young master, we should leave. The old man walked over and said with a smile, There's no hurry. Let's leave after eating. Li waved his hand. The old man could only nod in agreement. The meal before leaving was always especially sumptuous. When he invited the old man, he was rejected. He was not used to having so many people watching him eat together, so he sent them all out. During the meal, Rui gave many instructions. The young servant girl's face was full of reluctance. She didn't eat much of her favorite dishes. On the other hand, Mississippi Lu seemed to be in a good mood. She seemed to be looking forward to the trip this time. Li felt that Rui told him to keep an eye on Rui and not let her get into trouble was not easy to achieve. The way this lady did things was never something he could control. He raised his head and said, Why don't I go alone? Or can I bring Fong? Crack! The chopsticks in Mississippi Lu's hand broke into several pieces. She looked at Li and her lips curled into a meaningful smile. Ahem, forget it. Let's do as we said before. Li buried his head in his meal and didn't mention what he had just said. Young master, is the young madam not going back with us? A rather luxurious carriage stopped outside the house. The Li old man looked at Li and asked in confusion. Li got on the carriage and said, The madam is not well. I can go alone. The madam is not well? The old man was stunned for a moment. Then, a trace of joy appeared on his face. If that was the case, it was indeed not suitable for her to be tormented. After a year and a half, he could bring both mother and son over. That would be a joyous occasion for the house. There were also 11 guards accompanying them. It was said that there should have been 14 guards, but because one of them was injured, 2 were left behind to take care of him. After a few days, they would return on their own. Lu Rui didn't sit in the carriage. She rode a horse and walked in front. Li opened the curtain and waved goodbye to the people standing at the door. His line of sight was fixed on the door. He watched as the figure at the front of the carriage turned from clear to blurry. Beside her, there was a small figure waving his hand nonstop until the carriage turned a corner and he could no longer see it. Chapter 299. The carriage drove out of the city gate and headed east along the official road. The stable carriage gradually became bumpy. The so-called official road was actually just a slightly flat dirt road. It was far from the asphalt road or even cement road of the future. The carriage did not have any shock-absorbing properties. It was fine if the distance was short, but sitting in the carriage for a few hours was no different from riding a motorcycle on the village road of the future. Li had not felt this kind of torture in a long time. He let out a long sigh. If it wasn't for this, he should be flying with Rui and going on a sweet honeymoon. They should be looking at the mountains, the water, the flowers, the stars, and the moon. He wouldn't be lying in the carriage alone, or the two of them. The curtain of the carriage was lifted, and fresh air with a light fragrance rushed in. Li made some space for Mississippi Lu. Bored to death, he looked through the gap in the curtain and threw a broad bean into his mouth while looking at the road that kept going backwards. Although riding for a few hours was a piece of cake for Mississippi Lou, it had long lost its initial novelty. She was in a deadlock with Lee E over the last few broad beans in the bag. Until Lee E threw in a broad bean with his own saliva in exchange for a fierce eye roll from Mississippi Lou, he finally won. After a few hours of traveling, everyone must be tired. Why don't we rest for a while? Lee E moved to the front of the carriage, lifted the curtain, and said to the people outside. Old Man Lee stuck his head out from a smaller carriage in the back and said, "Young master, it's getting late. In less than an hour, we'll arrive at the next county. Once we get there, we'll first find an inn to stay at and then set off tomorrow morning." Lee E nodded and climbed back into the carriage. He secretly rejoiced that the distance between Qing and prefecture and the capital was not too far. 6 or 7 days, compared to a journey that could easily take months, was considered very short. However, thinking that this kind of jolting would continue for a week, he couldn't help but feel a headache. In the small courtyard, the sun was about to set. The young maidservant was lying on a rocking chair that Lee E often rested on. She was counting something with her fingers. Half a month is 15 days. Son-in-law and second young mistress have been gone for half a day. In another 14.5 days, we will see them again, Xiaohuan. Rui's voice came from inside the house. Hearing her mistress's voice, the servant girl responded with a ah. "Wash your hands and come back for dinner. I'll be back soon." She got up from the rocking chair and glanced out the door. When she saw Uncle Fong pass by, she turned around and walked back into the room listlessly. At the same time, Fong and a few other men had just walked out of the house. "Fong, are you sure they won't come back before midnight?" a man asked with uncertainty. "Don't worry." Fong patted his chest and said, "The women have gone to the temple to pray. They won't come back until after midnight. As long as we come back before midnight, there won't be any problems." "That's good. I heard that the competition for the courtesan belle these days will be very exciting. It's not easy to wait until my wife is not at home. This time, we have to take a good look." The few men laughed in tacit understanding. Once they were on the street, they immediately dispersed. "I'll go to Ingshun House to have a look." "Fong, are you going to Jadeite Courtyard to see Miss Hong?" When only Fong and another man were left, the other man patted Fong's shoulder and left with a big smile. Old Fong cursed under his breath and walked in the opposite direction. At this time, in Jadeite Courtyard, the madam was hiding in the room, smiling happily. She was obviously in a good mood. It was a wise decision to invest all the resources on Shen Miao Miao. She was already a little famous, and in the past few days, she had earned a lot of attention. In addition, she had also worked hard to win the support of many young masters. Her popularity was comparable to those veteran courtesans. This year, she might be able to get one of the top 10 courtesans. The only pity was that drunken Mo seemed to be possessed by something. No matter what she said, she was not willing to compete for the position of courtesan belle. If she had such a thought, her ranking would definitely be higher than Shen Miao Miao's. She had been in this industry for a lifetime and had seen all kinds of temperaments. Someone like drunken Mo would suffer sooner or later. If she didn't take advantage of her young years to work hard and plan for the future, she might be able to end up in a good family. Someone like her who acted recklessly would most likely end up in a miserable end. There was a knock on the door. The madam withdrew her thoughts and opened the door. Seeing who it was, she asked, "Drunken Mo, what's the matter?" If it was in the past, the madam would naturally not be so cold to the star of Jadeite Courtyard, her money tree. But now, the money tree had changed hands, so she naturally did not need to be so enthusiastic. "Mother, aren't you going to invite me in?" Sung Zumo seemed to be completely unaware of this and still said with a smile, "I say, drunken Mo, listen to Mother's advice. This will only destroy you in the end. Even if you don't think for Mother, you have to think for yourself. If this goes on, Mother really can't help you." No matter what, it was a relationship of many years, and the madam still did not give up trying to persuade her. Zung Zumo smiled and said, "That's why I came this time. You've thought it through?" The madam's eyes lit up. "Yes." Zung Zumo nodded and said, "I'm here to redeem myself. Where did you get so much money?" Looking at the stack of banknotes in her hand, the madam asked in shock after verifying their authenticity. The banknotes were real. As long as she went to the corresponding bank, she could exchange them for the equivalent amount of silver. The problem was, where did she get so much money? This money should be enough, right? Sung Zumo looked at her and asked. Enough. The madam nodded mechanically. According to the reputation, everyone in the jadeite courtyard had a clear price for their redemption. No matter who it was, as long as they had enough money, she would let them go. Of course, she would not easily let go of drunken Mo in the past. But now, her reputation was not as good as before. After the top beauty competition, she was afraid that her reputation would drop a lot, and the money needed to redeem herself would naturally be less, at least far less than what she had in her hands. She was a little hesitant at this moment. What if drunken Mo? As soon as this idea came up, she rejected it. It was a foregone conclusion that Chun Miao Miao would replace her as the new face of Jadeite Courtyard. There would be no more changes. Drunken Mo's usefulness to her was actually dispensable. It was better to accept the silver and do her a favor. Have you really thought it through? The madam looked at her and asked seriously. Obviously, she had made her choice at this time. After getting Sung Zumo's confirmation, the madam sighed and took out her contract from the box in the room. She said, for the sake of our past friendship, if you want to leave, wait until after the courtesan competition. Although her fame was not as good as before, she was still stronger than most people. At this critical time, there was no harm in gaining more popularity for Jadeite Courtyard. Okay, it was just a few days later. She had waited for so many years. A few more days was nothing. Moreover, the contract was in her hands. The moment she got it, she was already free. When she walked out of the madam's room, Sung Zumo felt unprecedentedly relaxed. She finally unloaded the mountain that had been pressing on her shoulders for a long time. She let out a long sigh of relief and walked all the way back to her room. It was as if she did not see the various complicated looks from her sisters in the past. She ignored Chun Miao Miao's gloating look. She pushed open the door and walked in. She saw Xiao Chui sitting by the bed with a sad face. This silly girl, she murmured. She had wanted to give her a surprise, but since she had promised her mother to keep it a secret, she could only tell her the news after the courtesan competition. Chapter 300. Miss, do you still want to paint today? Xiao Chui hurriedly stood up and asked. During the courtesan competition, everyone else was busy earning popularity to increase their chances. Only her young miss was not worried at all. She buried herself in painting all day as if she could never finish. Moreover, the paintings that she took with her every time she left never appeared again. I'm not painting anymore. Help me prepare the bath water. We're going out in a bit. Zung Zumo shook her head. She had already raised enough money to redeem herself, so there was no need to sell her paintings anymore. Moreover, the rarer something was, the greater its value. The few 3D paintings that occasionally appeared could be sold for a good price. If there were too many of them, it wouldn't be so easy to rely on selling paintings to make money in the future when they lacked money. Watching the young miss enter the inner room, Xiao Chui touched something in her bosom. Only then did her anxious heart calm down. This time, she would be the one to protect her young miss. Xiao Chui, just as she was in a trance, she heard a voice coming from the inner room. The young girl immediately stood up and responded, jogging over. Mian Show Garden was filled with fake mountains and waterside pavilions. It was a rare place of elegance. Anyone with a bit of status in the city would all treat this place as the first choice for inviting guests to a banquet. Especially in recent days, the garden was brightly lit almost every night. Tonight was no exception. The famous young master of a wealthy merchant in Qing and prefecture, Zhu Qing, was the host. Those invited included wealthy young masters of merchants, as well as many famous scholars of Qing and prefecture. With the scholars, there was naturally no lack of beauties. Any courtesan with a bit of fame also received an invitation. Of course, it was not certain if they would come. After all, Zhu Qing had promoted Lu Yi this year, and he had spared no effort. He could be considered as their competitor. Naturally, some people would not come, But with young Master Zhu's reputation, many people would still give him face. Thank you, young Master Zhu, for everything you've done for Yi. Yi is very grateful. In one of the pavilions, a tall, green-clothed woman bowed to the young man opposite her. Ah, Yi, what are you saying? Helping you is helping me. There's no need to be so distant between us. The young man smiled and waved his hand, saying nonchalantly. At this moment, many people were looking at the pavilion. Of the two people in the pavilion, one was a wealthy young master, and the other was one of the most famous courtesans in Qing and Prefecture. This banquet was obviously held for her. When it came to the level of the top 10 courtesans, it was actually very difficult to distinguish who was superior in terms of beauty or talent. If they really used these to rank them, no one would be convinced. Every year, the top beauty competition was not only a contest between them, but also a contest between the powers behind them. This year's situation, with Zhu Qing as the leader, the young masters of the wealthy merchants mostly stood behind Lu Yi, and behind Lu Xiaoqiao stood the many scholars of Qing and Prefecture. The others naturally also had their own supporters, but compared to these two people, they were still somewhat lacking. The battle for the championship would most likely be the battle between Lu Xiaoqiao and Lu Yi. In a while, there will be a few friends coming. They are scholars from the capital. I'll introduce you to them. Zhu Qing smiled. Miss Lu has the support of the scholars led by Yang Yinzhou. In terms of poetry, we are already at a disadvantage. In a while, you must take advantage of the opportunity. If you can make them sincerely help you, this time, we will have more than a 70% chance of taking the championship. Lu Yi nodded, then said with some pity, It's a pity that we didn't win over that mysterious Li. If we had his help, the many scholars of Qing and would not be a problem. Although Zhu Qing was a merchant, he had clearly heard of the Li that Lu Yi spoke of. Hearing this, he said, Don't worry. Although the invitation we sent out was like a rock in the ocean, and the silver was returned, I heard that he did not participate in anyone's banquet. I'm afraid he doesn't have much interest in these things. Just keep an eye on Yang Yinzhou and the others. Just as he finished speaking, he saw Lu Yi look in front of her and say in surprise, Why are they here? Zhu Qing followed her line of sight and saw a few figures walking over from afar. That's Yang Yinzhou, Wan Qiliang, and Miss Lu. Why are they? A look of surprise also appeared on Zhu Qing's face. Although he had sent out invitations to these people, he had never thought that they would come. After all, Yi was Miss Lu's greatest rival. Why would they come to such an occasion? Although he was surprised, everyone had a legitimate competitive relationship. The necessary etiquette was still needed. It was precisely because the two of them were the greatest rivals that they had to give each other even more respect. Brother Yang, Brother Wan, I didn't think that you would come. Sorry for not going out to meet you. Zhu Qing walked over and said with cupped hands. Sister Lu. Lu Xiaoqiao had become famous earlier than her, so Lu Yi took the initiative to greet her. No matter how intense the competition was in the dark, it could not be seen at all on the surface. The crowd only saw Zhu Qing, Yang Yinzhou, and the others laughing and chatting along the way. Lu Xiaoqiao and Lu Yi, the two popular courtesan candidates, held hands and were as close as sisters. I still have a few friends over there that I need to greet. I'm truly sorry for neglecting Brother Yang. After some polite small talk, Zhu Qing and Lu Yi went somewhere else. Yang Yinzhou and the others could not have come to cause trouble, so they let them be. How was it? Looking at Lu Yi's departing figure, the young man beside Yang Yinzhou turned his head and asked, You live up to your reputation. Yang Yinzhou nodded and said, To be able to receive such praise from the number one of Qing and Prefecture, the former number one scholar of Qing and Prefecture, was already very impressive. Wan Qiliang smiled and said, It looks like it won't be so easy for Miss Yi to win first place. Lu Xiaoqiao said with a smile, Do your best and leave it to fate. If Sister Yi wins the final courtesan title, Xiaoqiao can only congratulate you. Wan Qiliang laughed and said, Miss Xiaoqiao, don't worry. Brother Yinzhou's chest is full of ink. Just a little bit will be enough to help you in first place. The title of #1 scholar of Qing and prefecture is not an undeserved reputation. Yang Yinzhou's expression was bitter as he said, "Qiliang, please don't say anything about being the #1 scholar of Qing and prefecture. Aren't you making fun of me?" Wan Qiliang also finally realized that he had made a mistake just now. No matter how famous Yang Yinzhou was, as long as that person was around, the title of #1 scholar would never fall to him. Then he realized another problem and said, "I wonder which girl that person is supporting." If Yang Yinzhou continued, "I had originally thought that he would support the top artist of the Jade's Yard, Lady Zhu Amo, but that Lady Zhu Amo does not seem to have any interest in this competition. It is said that she only studies painting in her room every day. You may not know, but one of Lady Zhu Amo's paintings is in high demand. A few days ago, I spent 200 taels of silver to buy one." Wan Qiliang nodded and said, "It is also fortunate that she has no intention of competing for the title of courtesan. Otherwise, she would throw out a few more frightening poems, and the competition would be meaningless." Lu Xiaoqiao also secretly rejoiced in her heart. Although she did not have any relationship with that person, everyone was the same. This time, the competition would still be fair. As she thought this, she raised her head and inadvertently glanced around. Two figures who had just walked in appeared in her line of sight. Chapter 301. It's her. Lu Xiaoqiao was startled. Because of the competition for courtesan belle, she naturally knew the famous peers in Qing and prefecture. She even had a general understanding of each other's strengths and weaknesses. In fact, everyone had a copy of such information in their hands. Therefore, she had always been very concerned about Tsang Zumo, a very threatening opponent. This kind of attention, after learning that she did not attend any banquets and did not seem to have any intention of competing for the title of courtesan belle, gradually decreased, and all their energy was focused on Lu Yi. However, they still did not dare to underestimate her, because they all knew very well that the other party was the most unstable factor in this courtesan belle competition. Therefore, seeing Tsang Zumo on such an occasion tonight, Lu Xiaoqiao would naturally think more. Could it be that she had changed her mind and decided to fight again in these last days? Having missed the best time, this hope was very slim, unless Lu Xiaoqiao was not the only one who had this idea. Lu Yi also did not expect that Tsang Zumo, who never attended such banquets, would actually come tonight. After greeting her and saying a few words, she felt uneasy for no reason. After Lu Yi left, Tsang Zumo looked around and found that all the quiet places in the garden were occupied. She could only pull Xiao Chui to a relatively quiet table, planning to sit for a while and then leave. This would be considered as completing the task given to her by the procuress. "Over there, looks like Ms. Zumo. Doesn't she never attend such occasions? How could it be? It really is her. I haven't seen Ms. Zumo for a long time. It's said that she has no intention of competing for courtesan belle. Could the rumors be wrong? However, even if she wants to compete, it's too late, isn't it?" Although Tsang Zumo rarely appeared in front of people these days, the popularity she had accumulated would not fade so easily. On the contrary, because of the recent silence, there were more people paying attention to her tonight. "I didn't expect Ms. Zumo to come too." Looking from afar, a trace of surprise appeared on Yang Yinzhou's face. Wan Qiliang cared about other things and said, "Just in time. After hearing what Yinzhou said just now, I also want to buy a painting from Ms. Zumo. I wonder if she will give me face and give me a discount of a few dozen taels of silver. After all, I'm not as rich as Brother Yinzhou." As they chatted and laughed, they walked over. Tsang Zumo naturally didn't know what the people in the distance were thinking. Looking at Xiao Chui, who was still frowning, she finally couldn't bear to let her worry, so she whispered a few words in her ear. "Ah!" Xiao Chui was startled. Then, a look of joy appeared on her face. "Miss, is what you said true? In the future, we should lower your voice." Tsang Zumo gestured for her to keep quiet. This news couldn't be announced yet. Hee, I got it. The worry on Xiao Chui's face disappeared. Since her mistress had already redeemed herself, What was the point of competing for the title of top courtesan? Wherever her mistress went, she would go. She wouldn't have to be afraid anymore. She suddenly thought of something and said, "By the way, Miss, Xiao Chui has something to give you." Although the young miss no longer needed that thing, Xiao Chui still planned to give it to her. As for whether the young miss wanted to keep it or let her return it, it was up to the young miss. "What is it?" While Tseng Zumo was confused, she saw that after Xiao Chui searched around in her arms, her face changed, and she immediately became flustered. Oh no, miss, I lost that thing." Xiao Chui stood up in a panic. Just as she was about to search along the path she came from, she suddenly saw a thin booklet lying a few steps away. She let out a long sigh of relief. Just as she was about to run over and pick it up, a pair of slender hands appeared in her line of sight. Seeing a woman pick up the booklet, Xiao Chui quickly ran over and said, "I just dropped it." "Oh, just because you say it's yours, it's yours. Do you have any proof?" The woman glanced at Xiao Chui and flipped it open. "Get back." Xiao Chui was about to reach out and grab it, but she was pushed by the maid next to the woman. She took a few steps back and almost fell. "Whose maid is this? She's so unruly." The maid glared at Xiao Chui and stood in front of the woman. The woman naturally recognized that the young girl in front of her was the maid of Tseng Zumo, the top artist of the Jadeite courtyard. Otherwise, with her status, she wouldn't bother with a little maid. But who told her to be Tseng Zumo's maid? Last year, during the top courtesan selection, a certain young master who had always favored her turned to support Tseng Zumo at the last moment, causing her to lose the top courtesan selection. In this line of work, stealing a person's job was like killing their parents. She still remembered this hatred to this day. Every dog has its day. This year, her top courtesan selection was already in the bag, but the other party, the woman sneered in her heart. Did she still have a chance to turn the tables? Opening the booklet in her hand, the sneer on her face became even more intense. Did she think she could turn the tables with a few lousy poems? She casually recited the poem on the first page. "There's a beauty in the north, peerless and independent. One glance can topple a city, and another can topple a country. Better not know how to topple a city or a country. A beauty is hard to find." After reciting the poem, the sneer on her face disappeared. She felt some regret in her heart. Even if a renowned courtesan didn't have attainments in poetry, how could they not have the ability to appreciate beauty? This poem describing a beauty, although the style was irregular, there were no flowery words, no detailed descriptions, and the language was simple and monotonous. But why did the image of a beauty that could topple a country appear in her mind? "May I ask, Miss Hu, can I take a look at this poem?" A voice came from behind her. Yang Yinzhou walked over with large strides and looked at her as he asked, Young Master Yang." Hu Ning looked at Yang Yinzhou and didn't know what to say. She had just picked up this booklet from the ground. How would she know who wrote this poem? "Miss Hu, can I take a look at this item?" Yang Yinzhou once again pointed at the booklet in her hand and asked. Hu Ning nodded her head in a daze and handed over the booklet in her hand. Yang Yinzhou was the head of the scholars in Qing and Prefecture. He wasn't someone she could offend. Song of a beauty. I didn't think that there would still be someone who could write a folk song poem of this level. I wonder who the scholar who wrote this poem is. Can you introduce me to him? Yang Yinzhou's face showed an expression of admiration as he looked at Hu Ning and asked, "This poem was written for our family's mistress." Following the arrival of Yang Yinzhou and Lu Xiaoqiao, the crowd gradually gathered towards them. Xiao Chui's voice was blocked out by the crowd. Hu Ning-er's expression changed a few times before she suddenly smiled and said, "To tell you the truth, this poem was given to Ning-er by a young master. That young master specifically told me not to reveal his identity. I hope young Master Yang doesn't take offense." Her face carried just the right amount of apology, as if there really was something that was difficult to say. Anyone who saw this would not have any thoughts of blaming her. This song of a beauty was completely different from those obscene lyrics and songs. There wasn't a single word of description in the entire poem, and it left one's imagination running wild. Even as a woman, Hu Ning couldn't wait to meet the beauty in the poem. If this poem could be publicized by Yang Yinzhou, it would greatly increase her reputation. Zheng Zumo, I'll reluctantly accept this gift. Hu Ning muttered inwardly, and the smile on her face became even more radiant. Devastatingly beautiful? How beautiful must this woman be? Even the legendary beauty Bao Si can't be compared to her. She only listened to a few lines of the poem, yet she's so eager to meet the beauty in the poem. In the next few days, I'm afraid the Golden Phoenix Pavilion's door will be trampled to pieces. Miss Ning, Er's title of courtesan belle is in the bag. If the Golden Phoenix Pavilion invests more resources, she might even be able to fight for the title of courtesan belle. Hu Ning, Er's heart was blooming with joy as she listened to the crowd's discussions. Tonight's surprise was simply too big for her. At this time, Yang Yinzhou flipped to a page, and in the next moment, a puzzled voice sounded in her ears. The clouds think of her clothes, the flowers think of her face, the spring breeze caresses the balustrade with dew. If we don't meet in the jadeite courtyard, we will meet under the moonlight on the Yaotai Pavilion. May I know when Miss Ning transferred to the jadeite courtyard from the Golden Phoenix Pavilion? Jadeite courtyard? Hu Ning expression froze. Chapter 302. Miss Ning transferred to the jadeite courtyard. I've never heard of this. I just saw her at the Golden Phoenix Pavilion yesterday. Then what is this line, if not in the jadeite courtyard? We will meet under the moonlight at the Jade Pavilion mean? Could it be that this poem isn't written for Miss Ning? Hearing Yang Yinzhou recite another poem, the crowd was stunned for a moment before they started to discuss among themselves. These famous courtesans didn't have to stay in the same place for the rest of their lives. It was common for them to transfer to another brothel, but this would only happen to slightly famous courtesans like the top 10 courtesans. Unless the brothel keeper was a fool, she wouldn't let go of such a cash cow. Obviously, Hu Ning was the Golden Phoenix Pavilion's brothel keeper's cash cow, and the possibility of her transferring to another brothel was minuscule. With this, the crowd couldn't help but think of another possibility. Could it be that this poem wasn't written for her? If that was the case, then the song of a beauty that stunned the crowd just now wasn't written for her, right? Thinking about it, although Hu Ning could be considered beautiful, it was too much of an exaggeration to say that she was devastatingly beautiful. Even she herself wouldn't dare to admit it. As for the second poem, the rosy clouds are her clothes, the flowers are her face, the spring breeze caresses the railings, the dewdrops moisten the flowers, making them more vibrant. Such a beauty, if not in the jadeite courtyard. We will meet under the moonlight at the Jade Pavilion. This was also a poem praising a beauty. Compared to it, the soft waist and soft limbs, skillful in singing and dancing, that have been spreading like wildfire these days could only be considered as obscene lyrics. The previous beauty song and the poem just now were definitely a rare masterpiece. It was unknown which great talent had written them. Some people even felt that it was a great waste to use such a poem on a few courtesans in a brothel. If not in the jadeite courtyard, the jadeite courtyard. Finally, someone came back to his senses and murmured, "These two poems are both about a girl in the jade courtyard." Could it be Chun Miao Miao, who has been in the limelight recently? In the crowd, Chun Miao Miao's face was blushing. She didn't dare to admit that these two poems were written for her, even if she had 10 guts. She knew herself. If she was really like what was written in the poems, how could the title of the top artist in the Jade's courtyard fall on Zheng Zumo's head? After a familiar figure appeared in her mind, Chun Miao Miao finally understood. Of course, there was no lack of people in the crowd who understood the situation. After a short moment of commotion, the place suddenly fell silent again. Everyone turned their gazes and looked at the woman who was not far away. The woman was comforting the servant girl who was on the verge of tears. From afar, she heard the servant girl say, "Miss, she snatched the poem that Lili gave you." Lili, in the circle of scholars in Qing and Fu, whenever these 3 words were mentioned, their hearts would tremble. As a result, Those with the surname Li did not dare to let outsiders call them young master. Since it was that person, then all of this could be explained. Thinking of the rumors between him and Lady Zumo, everyone immediately understood. Yang Yinzhou held the thin book in his hand. From time to time, voices could be heard. There is a beautiful person, like a clear breeze. Adding 1 point is too long. Subtracting 1 point is too short. Her form, like a graceful swan, like a swimming dragon. Wan Shiliang stood beside Yang Yinzhou in a daze and murmured, "Bullying, this is too much." Every single one of them could be used as the finale, enough for an outdated courtesan to make a comeback. Yet, they were tossed out so casually, and there were so many of them at once. In this way, how could Lu Qiaoqiao and Lu Yi fight for first place? Hu Ning-er's face was pale, and she almost lost her footing. She forced a smile and said, "I was just joking just now. These poems were naturally not written for Ning-er. I picked it up on the ground just now. I'm afraid someone lost it." Yang Yinzhou and Wan Qiliang only had eyes for the book and did not pay attention to Hu Ning-er at all. The latter moved her gaze away from the book and exclaimed, "To think that someone could reach the pinnacle of folk song poems, songs of Chu, and poetry. I'm afraid we will not be able to catch up, even if we spend our entire lives." Suddenly, he asked in confusion, "Luo, Shun Fu." It compares the woman one admires to a goddess. The words are beautiful, but not impetuous, and the portrayal is already at the pinnacle. It is fascinating. But where is this Luo River? I've never heard of it before. Could it be made up? Yang Yinzhou's gaze did not move away from the book. He said, "Luo River is the ancient name of Yuan River. Last night, you and I were boating on Yuan River. Moreover, the name Luo Shun is commonly seen in ancient books. How could it be made up?" Wan Shiliang naturally knew that his knowledge was far from Yang Yinzhou's. If he said there was, then there must be. It's him. It can only be him, Yang Yinzhou murmured. A hint of unwillingness appeared on his face, but he then shook his head with a wry smile. He had already given up on the idea of comparing himself to him in this life. At this time, the crowd slowly parted to form a path. Zheng Zumo and Xiao Chui walked over. Yang Yinzhou walked over and said, "Miss Zumo, I have a request. Can I make a copy of the poem book in my hand?" In fact, even now, Zheng Zumo did not know what was written in the book. She was also very confused. When did Li give this to her? Why didn't Xiao Chui tell her? Also, why was Hu Ning-er's face so pale? Why were these people looking at her like that? All the mysteries were contained in the thin book that Yang Yinzhou handed over. She took the book and flipped it open. 1 page, 2 pages, 3 pages. As the former top courtesan, her attainments in poetry were naturally not bad. Gradually, her pretty face began to blush inexplicably. Were these poems all talking about her? Was she really that good? Looking at those extremely extravagant descriptions, she could not help but think of the scene that night. She only felt that even the roots of her ears were beginning to burn. Outside the crowd, after Zhu Qing came back to her senses, she turned to the few young people beside her and asked, "How is it? Are you confident?" Heck, confident? Those poems have already praised that woman to the heavens. Among all the scholars in the Jing Kingdom, who would dare say the word confident? The leading young man shook his head. This was already beyond the scope of their competition. It was better to save some face. In the field, Lu Qiaoqiao and Lu Yi looked at each other and saw the deep helplessness in each other's eyes. The two of them had fought for so long, but in the end, it was still like drawing water with a sieve. And the few people who had hopes of becoming the top courtesan, including Chun Miao Miao, all looked at Hu Ning with incomparably fierce eyes, as if they wanted to skin her alive. They did not want to compete for the top courtesan anymore. Damn Hu Ning! Why did she have to recite poems for no reason? Sensing their malice, Hu Ning-er's face became even paler. She had probably become everyone's public enemy. You're tuning into the Romance Rendezvous YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.